Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. On a stifling August night in New York at 2:47 a.m., a ringing phone changed everything. Did you know that sometimes a single moment can divide your life into before and after? That's what happened to me. I was Officer Anthony Russo, badge number 4782, working the night shift at Brooklyn's 75th Precinct. I'd been a cop for 7 years and thought I knew everything this city had to offer. I was wrong. The radio crackled to life as I sat in my patrol car on Pitkin Avenue, fighting to stay awake after 5 straight nights of overtime. The coffee from the bodega had gone cold hours ago, and the streetlights cast that sickly orange glow that makes everything look like a fever dream. My partner, Luis Santiago, was dozing in the passenger seat, his head tilted back against the headrest. All units, we have a 1054 at 1847 East New York Avenue, apartment 6B, possible 1056A. Caller reports strange circumstances. Any available unit, please respond. 10-54 meant a possible dead body. 10-56A meant suicide. Strange circumstances could mean anything in this city, but something about the dispatcher's voice made me sit up straighter. There was an edge to it, something I'd never heard from Patricia, our usual night dispatcher. She'd been doing this job for 15 years, and nothing rattled her anymore. But tonight she sounded unsettled. I nudged Luis awake. "We got a call?" He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "What is it this time?" "Possible body. East New York Avenue." Luis checked his watch and sighed. 3 hours until shift ends, of course. He picked up the radio. Unit 7-5-1-4 responding to the 10-54 at 1847 East New York Avenue. Copy that, 7514. Be advised, caller was the building super. Says he hasn't seen the tenant, a Ms. Isabella Rivera, in 3 weeks. Neighbors have been complaining about a smell. 3 weeks. In August. In New York. You can imagine what that meant. Luis and I exchanged a look. We'd both worked enough decomp cases to know what we were walking into. The smell alone would be enough to make most people vomit, but it was part of the job. The building was one of those pre-war walk-ups that seemed to lean slightly to one side, as if exhausted from decades of holding up too many lives. The brick facade was stained with years of pollution and neglect, and several windows were either boarded up or covered with aluminum foil. The front door hung open, its lock broken long ago. The super met us in the lobby, a thin man in his 60s with trembling hands and bloodshot eyes. His name tag read Carlos, and he kept wiping his palms on his stained work pants. "Officers, thank God you're here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been the super here for 23 years, and I've never... Something's not right up there." "What do you mean, not right?" I asked, pulling out my notepad. Carlos glanced around the empty lobby as if someone might be listening. "Isabella Rivera, she's lived here for 5 years. Quiet woman. Always paid rent on time. Worked at the hospital as a night nurse. But 3 weeks ago, she just stopped coming and going, her mails piling up. And the smell..." He shuddered. "But that's not the strange part." Luis raised an eyebrow. "There's something stranger than a decomposing body." Carlos nodded frantically. "The neighbors, they say they still hear her walking around up there. Every night between 3 and 4 a.m. The same pattern. Kitchen to living room to bedroom, bedroom to bathroom, then back to the kitchen. Over and over. Mrs. Chen in 5B, she's right below, says it drives her crazy. But how can someone be walking around if they're dead? I felt a chill run down my spine despite the oppressive heat. In my experience, there was always a logical explanation. Rats in the walls, old pipes, the building settling. But Carlos seemed genuinely terrified. "We'll check it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What apartment number again?" 6B, 6th floor. The elevator's been broken for 2 months, so you'll have to take the stairs." He handed me a key ring with several keys on it. "The brass one is for her door." I couldn't go in there myself. The stairwell smelled of mold, urine, and something else. That sweet, cloying smell that anyone who's worked crime scenes knows too well. It got stronger with each floor we climbed. By the 4th floor, Luis had pulled out a handkerchief to cover his nose. By the 5th, we could both taste it in the air. The 6th floor hallway was dimly lit, with only every other bulb working. The carpet was a faded brown that might have once been red, worn thin in the middle from decades of foot traffic. Apartment 6B was at the end of the hall, its door painted a peeling green that stood out against the beige walls. The smell was overwhelming now, seeming to seep through the door itself. I'd been to dozens of death scenes, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the silence. Usually in these old buildings you could hear TVs, conversations, life happening behind the doors. But the 6th floor was dead quiet, as if the other residents had abandoned it. I knocked on the door. "NYPD. Miss Rivera, are you in there?" Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. "Isabella Rivera, this is the police. We're coming in to check on your welfare. Still nothing." I inserted the key and turned it slowly. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet hallway. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit us like a physical wall. The apartment was dark, all the curtains drawn. I felt for the light switch and flipped it on. The living room looked normal at first glance. A brown couch, a small TV on a stand, a coffee table with magazines from 3 weeks ago. But then I noticed the details. Every picture frame on the walls was turned face down. Every mirror in sight was covered with newspaper. And on the coffee table, arranged in a perfect circle, were 13 cell phones. "What the hell?" Luis whispered behind me. I approached the coffee table slowly. The phones were all different models, different makes. Some looked new, others were several years old. In the center of the circle was a piece of paper with a single line written in neat handwriting. They kept calling, so I kept answering. "Anthony," Luis said, his voice tight. "Look at the wall." I turned to where he was pointing. On the wall above the couch, written in what looked like blood, were hundreds of phone numbers. They covered every inch of the wall, some overlapping others, creating a dizzying pattern that hurt to look at. Some of the numbers were local, 718 and 347 area codes. Others were from area codes I didn't recognize. "We need to find the body," I said, trying to focus on the job at hand. "Luis, check the bedroom. I'll take the kitchen and bathroom." As Luis headed down the hallway, I moved toward the kitchen. It was small, typical for these old buildings, with barely enough room for one person to turn around. The refrigerator was humming loudly, and there were dishes in the sink, moldy and crawling with flies. But no body. The bathroom was next. I pushed open the door, bracing myself for what I might find. The shower curtain was drawn. I reached out, grabbed the edge, and pulled it back in one quick motion. Empty. Just a normal bathtub with some soap scum around the edges. "Anthony!" Luis called out. I rushed to the bedroom, where Luis stood in the doorway, his face pale, even in the dim light from the hallway. I looked past him and felt my blood run cold. Isabella Rivera was sitting at a desk by the window, facing the wall. She was clearly dead, had been for weeks from the look of it. Her body was in an advanced state of decomposition, her skin blackened and sliding off in places. But that wasn't what made us both freeze. She was holding a phone to her ear, an old landline phone, the cord stretching to a jack in the wall. And even though it was impossible, even though every rational part of my brain said it couldn't be happening, I could hear a dial tone coming from the receiver. Luis reached for his radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is 7514. We have a confirmed 10-54. We need the medical examiner and maybe a supervisor. There are some unusual circumstances here." "Copy that, 7514. Me and supervisor en route. What kind of unusual circumstances?" Luis looked at me, and I shook my head. How could we explain this over the radio? "Just tell them to hurry," he said. I stepped closer to the body, fighting every instinct that told me to run. Isabella Rivera had been beautiful once. I could tell from the photos on her desk, all turned face down like the ones in the living room. Long, dark hair, warm, brown eyes, a smile that looked genuine. The woman in the chair was unrecognizable as the same person. There was a notebook on the desk, filled with the same neat handwriting as the note in the living room. I pulled on latex gloves and carefully picked it up, trying not to disturb the scene more than necessary. The first page was dated 3 weeks ago. August 3rd, 2019. It started with one wrong number, 3:13 a.m. The voice on the other end was crying, begging for help. They said they were trapped, that something was coming for them. I tried to explain they had the wrong number, but they wouldn't listen. They just kept saying my name over and over. Isabella, Isabella, Isabella. How did they know my name? I flipped to the next page. August 4th, more calls, different voices, but all saying the same thing. They're trapped. Something's coming. And they all know my name. I've started writing down the numbers, but when I try to call back, they're all disconnected. Every single one. The entries continued, becoming increasingly frantic. August 7th, I unplugged the phone. It rang anyway. How is that possible? The man on the line said he was calling from inside the building, from apartment 6B. But that's my apartment. I'm in my apartment, alone. August 10th, they're calling my cell now, and my work phone, and phones I don't even own. I found a phone in my kitchen drawer that I've never seen before. It was ringing. They're all ringing, all the time. Even when I don't answer, I can hear them, crying, begging, saying my name. The last entry was barely legible, the handwriting shaky and erratic. August 15th. I understand now. They're not calling for help. They're calling to warn me. It's already here. It's been here all along, in the walls, in the mirrors, in every reflection, watching, waiting. And now it wants me to join them, to make the calls, to say the names. I can see them all now. Everyone who didn't listen, everyone who thought it was just a wrong number. We're all connected now. All of us. Forever. The phone is ringing. I have to answer. I have to... The entry cut off mid-sentence. Jesus Christ, Louise muttered, reading over my shoulder. She had a psychotic break. Has to be. The isolation, working night shifts at the hospital, it can mess with your head. I wanted to agree with him. It would have been so easy to write it off as mental illness. A tragedy, but an explainable one. But then I heard it. A phone ringing. Not the landline in Isabella's decomposing hand. Not any of the cell phones in the living room. The sound was coming from inside the walls, all around us, like dozens of phones ringing at once, slightly out of sync with each other, creating a maddening cacophony. Luis and I looked at each other, and I saw my own fear reflected in his eyes. We'd been cops long enough to face down armed suspects, to run toward danger when everyone else ran away. But this was something different. Something we didn't understand and couldn't explain. The ringing stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving a silence that was somehow worse. And then, from the living room, we heard footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. Kitchen to living room to bedroom. We both drew our weapons, more out of instinct than any belief that guns would help us here. I moved to the doorway, Luis right behind me, and peered into the hallway. Empty. But the footsteps continued. Living room to bedroom to bathroom. I could track them by sound, moving through the apartment in the exact pattern Carlos had described. And then I realized something that made my skin crawl. The footsteps were coming from above us, from the ceiling. But there was no 7th floor. We were on the top floor of the building. "We need to get out of here," Luis whispered, and I'd never heard him sound scared before. Not in 7 years of partnership. We secure the scene and wait for backup outside. I nodded, but as we turned to leave, the landline in Isabella's hand started ringing again. Not a dial tone this time, but an incoming call. The phone that had been disconnected for 3 weeks, held by a woman who'd been dead just as long, was ringing. And then, impossible as it was, her decomposed fingers tightened around the receiver. "Hello." The voice that came from her rotted throat was clear as day. The same voice from the photos videos we'd later find on her social media, pleasant and professional. "Yes, this is Isabella. How can I help you?" Luis grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door. We stumbled over each other, getting out of the apartment, slamming the door behind us. In the hallway, we could hear other doors opening, residents peering out to see what the commotion was about. Mrs. Chen from 5B was there, an elderly woman in a floral nightgown, looking at us with frightened eyes. "Did you find her?" she asked in accented English. "Did you stop the walking?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. My personal cell, not my work phone. The number on the screen was one I didn't recognize, a 718 area code, but the rest of the digits seemed to shift and change as I looked at them, never quite staying the same. "Don't answer it," Luis said, but I was already reaching for the decline button. As soon as I rejected the call, his phone rang. Then Mrs. Chen's. Then every phone in every apartment on the floor, a chorus of different ringtones creating a deafening symphony. And from behind the door of 6B, we could hear Isabella's voice, clear and calm. "They're calling for you now. They know your names. Anthony Russo, Luis Santiago. They've been waiting so long to talk to you." The medical examiner arrived 20 minutes later, along with our supervisor, Sergeant Emily Johnson. By then, Luis and I were waiting in the lobby with Carlos, none of us willing to go back up to the 6th floor. We'd tried to maintain the scene, to do our jobs, but some things are beyond what any amount of training can prepare you for. "What exactly am I walking into here?" Sergeant Johnson asked, her tone suggesting she thought we were overreacting. She was tough, had been on the force for 20 years, and didn't have much patience for what she called spooked rookies, even though neither Luis nor I were rookies anymore. "The deceased is in the bedroom," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. "Isabella Rivera, tentative identification based on photos in the apartment. She's been dead for approximately 3 weeks. But there are unusual elements to the scene." "Unusual how?" she pressed. Luis and I exchanged a look. How could we explain what we'd seen? How could we tell her about the phones, the footsteps, the voice from a dead woman's throat? "Just be careful up there, Sarge," Luis said finally. "Something's not right." She gave us a hard look but didn't push it. "Wait here. We'll process the scene and get the body out." Then you two can write up your reports. She headed up with the ME and 2 other officers who'd arrived as backup. We waited in the lobby, Carlos pacing nervously, muttering prayers under his breath in Spanish. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then my radio crackled to life. "Russo, Santiago, get up here, now!" It was Sergeant Johnson, and she sounded shaken. We climbed the stairs again, each step feeling heavier than the last. On the 6th floor, we found Sergeant Johnson standing in the hallway outside 6B, her face pale. The 2 backup officers were with her, both looking equally disturbed. "The body's gone," she said simply. "What do you mean gone?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "I mean gone. The ME says there's clear evidence of decomposition, fluids, tissue, the whole 9 yards. But Isabella Rivera's body is not in that apartment." We followed her inside. The bedroom was exactly as we'd left it, except for one crucial detail. The chair by the desk was empty. The phone was still there, receiver off the hook, but Isabella Rivera was nowhere to be found. "This doesn't make sense," Luis said, running his hand through his hair. "We saw her. She was right there holding the phone. She was talking." Sergeant Johnson looked at us like we'd lost our minds. "Talking?" "The woman's been dead for 3 weeks. "I know how it sounds," I said, "but we both heard it. Check the notebook on the desk. Read what she wrote." But when Sergeant Johnson picked up the notebook, her expression grew even more confused. "It's blank," she said, showing us the pages. Every single page was empty, no trace of the frantic entries I'd read just an hour before. "That's impossible," I said, grabbing the notebook from her. But she was right. The pages were pristine, untouched. "Look," Sergeant Johnson said, her voice taking on a careful tone like she was talking to someone unstable. "It's been a long shift. You two have been pulling a lot of overtime lately. Maybe you should—" She was interrupted by the sound of footsteps from above. That same measured pace. Kitchen to living room to bedroom. "You hear that, right?" Luis said desperately. "Tell me you hear that." Sergeant Johnson nodded slowly, looking up at the ceiling. "Old building, probably just the pipes or—" The lights went out. Not just in the apartment, but in the entire building, plunging us into absolute darkness. In that darkness, phones began to ring. Not just a few, but hundreds, thousands. Like every phone in New York City was ringing at once. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. And then, cutting through the chaos of ringtones, a voice. Isabella Rivera's voice, but multiplied, echoing, like 100 versions of her speaking in unison. "Anthony Russo, badge number 4782. 7 years on the force. Lives alone on Prospect Avenue. No family in the city. Who would miss you, Anthony? Who would even notice if you disappeared?" My blood ran cold. How did she know those things? How could she know? Luis Santiago, badge number 5291, married to Sofia Martinez. 2 kids, Maria and David. They're sleeping right now, aren't they, Luis? Safe in their beds. But phones ring in dreams too. Luis made a sound like a wounded animal. "No, no, you stay away from them." The lights flickered back on, and we were no longer in apartment 6B. We were in a room I'd never seen before. Walls covered floor to ceiling with phones. Old rotary phones, modern smartphones. Payphones ripped from their booths, all connected by a massive web of cords and wires that pulsed like veins. And in the center of it all sat Isabella Rivera. But she wasn't decomposed anymore. She looked exactly like her photos. Beautiful, alive, but wrong. Her eyes were solid black, no whites, no iris, just empty voids that seemed to pull light into them. She was smiling, but the smile was too wide, stretching further than any human mouth should. "Welcome," she said, her voice coming from every phone in the room simultaneously. "I've been waiting for you. We all have." That's when I noticed the others. In the shadows between the phones, barely visible, were figures. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All standing perfectly still, all holding phones to their ears, all staring at us with those same black void eyes. "Every wrong number," Isabella continued. "Every missed call, every voice asking for help that you ignored. We're all here, connected, waiting. And now it's your turn to join the network." The phones around us started ringing again, but this time, each one displayed a name and number. I saw my mother's number, even though she'd been dead for 3 years. Luis's kids' names appeared on screens. Our partners, our friends, everyone we'd ever cared about. "Answer them," Isabella said. "They're all calling for you. They want to hear your voice one last time before you become like us, before you become part of the system." "This isn't real," Sergeant Johnson said, but her voice was shaking. "This can't be real." "Reality is just a series of connections," Isabella replied. "Synapses firing, signals transmitting, voices carrying across distances. What makes a phone call any less real than a thought? What makes death any more permanent than a disconnected line?" She stood up, and as she did, the room seemed to expand, stretching impossibly in all directions. The walls of phones grew higher, wider, an infinite maze of connections and voices. I could hear them all now. Thousands of conversations, cries for help, last words, first words, every call that had ever been made in the city flowing through this impossible space. "You have a choice," Isabella said, holding out an old rotary phone to me. "Answer the call, join us willingly, and keep some part of yourself. Or resist, and we'll take you anyway, piece by piece, call by call, until there's nothing left but the dial tone." I looked at the phone in her hand, then at Luis and Sergeant Johnson. The backup officers were gone. When had they disappeared? Had they ever been there at all? I couldn't remember their faces, their names. It was like they'd been erased, disconnected from reality. My phone rang in my pocket. The screen showed a number I knew by heart but hadn't dialed in years. My father's number. He'd died when I was 15, but I still remembered it. Still remembered his voice. "Don't answer it," Luis warned. But his own phone was ringing too, and I could see the war on his face, the desire to hear his children's voices battling with the knowledge that it was a trap. "Time's running out," Isabella said. And indeed, I could feel something changing. The room was getting smaller again, the walls of phones pressing in. The figures in the shadows were moving closer, their void eyes growing larger, hungrier. "We have to get out," Sergeant Johnson said, pulling out her service weapon. "There has to be a way out." But Isabella just laughed, a sound like 1,000 phones going off at once. "There is no out, there is no in, there's only the network. We're already inside your head, traveling along your neurons like signals along a wire. Every time you've ever answered a phone, you've let us in a little more." She was right. I could feel it now, a buzzing in my brain, like static between stations. Memories that weren't mine, flickering through my consciousness. A woman in Seattle answering her last call. A man in Mumbai listening to his dead wife's voicemail over and over. A child in London speaking to something that claimed to be her mother. The phone in Isabella's hand rang, and she held it out to me again. "It's for you, Anthony. It's always been for you." I reached for it, my hand moving against my will, drawn by something beyond my control. But as my fingers touched the receiver, Luis grabbed my wrist. "No," he said firmly. "We're cops. We don't give in to fear. We don't abandon our posts." He was right. I'd taken an oath to protect and serve, even against things I didn't understand, even against impossible horrors hiding in the walls of New York City. I pulled my hand back, and Isabella's smile faltered for the first time. "You can't resist forever," she said. "No one can. The calls never stop. The network never sleeps. And everyone eventually answers." The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the back of an ambulance. The harsh fluorescent lights made me squint, and there was an oxygen mask over my face. A paramedic was checking my vitals, his face concerned but professional. "Officer Russo? Can you hear me? You're safe now. Safe." What did that even mean anymore? I tried to sit up, but he gently pushed me back down. "Easy there. You and your partner were found unconscious in an empty apartment. Carbon monoxide leak, probably from the old heating system. You're lucky someone called it in. Carbon monoxide. Of course. That's what they'd say. That's what made sense. Hallucinations from gas poisoning. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard, and when I looked at my phone, there were 17 missed calls from numbers that didn't exist. Luis was in the ambulance too, on the stretcher next to mine. He was conscious, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. When he turned to look at me, I saw he knew the same thing I did. Whatever had happened in that apartment, it wasn't over. "Where's Sergeant Johnson?" I asked the paramedic. He frowned. "Who?" "It was just you two in the apartment. The super called it in when he heard you guys collapse." I wanted to argue, to insist that our sergeant had been with us, but the memories were already starting to feel fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream after waking up. Had she been there? Had any of it been real? They kept us at Brooklyn Hospital Center for observation overnight. The doctors ran tests, checking for brain damage from the supposed carbon monoxide exposure. Everything came back normal. Too normal. Like our bodies had never been exposed to any gas at all. Luis and I didn't talk about what happened. Not in the hospital, where nurses came and went and other cops stopped by to check on us. But I could see it in his eyes. The fear, the knowledge that something had touched us that night. Something that didn't belong in our understanding of the world. When they released us the next morning, I went home to my empty apartment in Prospect Heights. It was a small one-bedroom, nothing special, but it had always been my sanctuary, the place where I could shut out the chaos of the city and just exist in peace. But now, every phone in the place felt like a threat. I unplugged the landline I never used, turned off my cell phone, even covered the intercom by the door with tape. I needed silence. I needed to think. But the silence didn't last. At exactly 3:13 a.m., my disconnected landline rang. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, staring at the phone on my nightstand. The cord was clearly unplugged, lying loose on the floor. But it rang again and again, 7 times before it stopped. Then my cell phone, which I'd powered off completely, lit up. The screen showed an incoming call from a number that was all zeros. I didn't answer. I couldn't answer. But I could hear a voice coming from the speaker anyway, faint but clear. "Anthony. We're still waiting. The network is growing. Every unanswered call makes us stronger." I threw the phone across the room, where it shattered against the wall. But the voice continued, now coming from the fragments. "You can break the devices, but you can't break the connections. We're in the infrastructure now. In every cell tower, every wire, every signal bouncing between satellites. We are the dial tone of the city." I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted, paranoid, jumping at every sound. I needed to talk to someone, to know I wasn't losing my mind. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went to Luis's house. Luis lived in Bay Ridge with his wife Sophia and their 2 kids. It was a nice neighborhood, tree-lined streets, the kind of place where kids still played outside and neighbors knew each other's names. When I rang the doorbell, Sophia answered, and the dark circles under her eyes told me everything I needed to know. "Anthony," she said, her voice strained. He's in the garage. He won't come out. He says the phones are listening." I found him sitting in the corner of the garage, surrounded by every phone they owned, cells, tablets, even the kids' toy phones, all smashed to pieces. He looked up when I entered, and his eyes were wild. "They called my kids, Anthony." Last night, Maria answered the phone in her room, and when I got there, she was talking to someone who sounded exactly like her grandmother. But Sophia's mother has been dead for 2 years. What did she say? Maria? She said Abuela wanted her to come visit. Said she was lonely and there were so many other kids where she was, all playing games with phones. I grabbed the phone from her and the voice. He shuddered. It laughed. It said Maria would make a perfect addition to the network. That children's minds are so open, so accepting of impossible things. We sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the destroyed electronics. Then Luis asked the question I'd been dreading. What do we do? How do we fight something like this? I didn't have an answer. How could I? We were cops, trained to deal with human threats, with things that existed in the physical world. But this was something else entirely. Something that existed in the spaces between, in the connections we'd built to bring us together, but which now seemed to be pulling us apart. We need to find out more about Isabella Rivera, I said finally. There has to be something in her history, some reason why this started with her. Luis nodded slowly. I'll check with the hospital where she worked. You take her apartment building, talk to more residents. But Anthony... He grabbed my arm as I stood to leave. Be careful. And don't trust any calls, not even if they sound like people you know. I went back to 1847 East New York Avenue that afternoon. The building looked different in daylight, less menacing, more just sad and neglected. Carlos wasn't in his usual spot in the lobby, and when I knocked on his apartment door, there was no answer. One of the residents told me he'd left suddenly the night before, packed a single bag, and took a bus out of the city. Said he was mumbling about voices in the walls. I started knocking on doors, identifying myself as a police officer following up on the incident. Most residents didn't answer. Those who did seemed nervous, eager to close their doors again as quickly as possible. But on the 5th floor, I found someone willing to talk. Mrs. Chen, the woman we'd seen in the hallway that night, invited me into her apartment. It was small but immaculate, decorated with photos of family and traditional Chinese artwork. She served me tea with shaking hands. I knew something was wrong with that girl, she said in her accented English. Isabella. She changed 3 weeks ago. Before that, she was lovely. Always said hello, helped me with my groceries. But then, what happened 3 weeks ago? Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, staring into her tea. There was another death in the building. 7B. A young man, Michael Torres. He worked for the phone company, Verizon, I think. Found dead in his apartment, holding his work phone. The police said it was a heart attack, but he was only 28, healthy. My pulse quickened. Did Isabella know him? They were dating, I think. Saw them together sometimes. After he died, she became different. Stayed in her apartment. But I could hear her talking all the time. On the phone, always on the phone. Different voices, like she was having conversations with many people. And then the walking started. The walking you mentioned to us that night? She nodded. Every night, 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. The same pattern. But officer. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. Sometimes I could hear her walking in my apartment too. The footsteps would be above me, in 6B, and in my living room at the same time. Same pattern, same pace. Like she was in two places at once. I wrote everything down, trying to make sense of it. Michael Torres, phone company employee, died 3 weeks before Isabella. There was a connection here, a thread to follow. Mrs. Chen, have you received any strange phone calls lately? Her teacup rattled as she set it down. Yes, every night since you came. My sister's voice. She lives in Beijing, but the calls come at 3 a.m. here, which would be 3 p.m. there. But when I call her back in the morning, she says she never called. The voice knows things, though. Things only my sister would know. I left Mrs. Chen's apartment with more questions than answers. Back at the precinct, I found our squad room nearly empty. Word had gotten out about what happened to Luis and me, and while the official report blamed carbon monoxide, cops are superstitious by nature. Nobody wanted to be near us. I dug into Michael Torres's death report. It was bare bones, found dead in his apartment on July 15, 2019. Cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. No signs of foul play. But there was an addendum from the responding officers that caught my eye. Victim found holding multiple phones, all showing active calls to different numbers. Unable to trace numbers, possibly a system glitch. System glitch, right. I cross-referenced his employment records. Michael Torres had been a network engineer for Verizon, specifically working on modernizing the city's cellular infrastructure. His last project before his death? Installing new 5G towers throughout Brooklyn, with a focus on improving coverage in dead zones. Dead zones. The term felt different now, weighted with new meaning. My desk phone rang. I stared at it, letting it ring 3 times before answering. It was Luis. Anthony, you need to get to Brooklyn Hospital, now. What happened? It's one of the nurses from Isabella's unit. She's... Just get here. I drove to the hospital with lights and sirens, my mind racing. The emergency department was in chaos when I arrived. Luis met me at the entrance, his face grim. Her name is Patricia Williams, he said, leading me through the corridors. She worked the same night shifts as Isabella. About an hour ago, she locked herself in a supply closet and started screaming, when security got the door open. He pushed open a door to reveal a scene that made my blood run cold. Patricia Williams, a woman in her 40s according to her ID badge, was standing in the center of the room. Her arms were outstretched, and in each hand, she held a phone. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was that she had somehow grown extra arms. 4 additional arms protruded from her torso at impossible angles, each holding a different phone. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, and from it came not one voice, but dozens, all speaking simultaneously. The network requires expansion. Each node must connect to multiple pathways. Integration proceeding. Resistance is causing system errors. Please hold while we reconfigure your biological parameters. Medical staff stood frozen in the doorway, unsure what to do. This wasn't something they'd trained for. This wasn't something anyone had trained for. How is this possible? I whispered to Luis. It's not, he replied, but it's happening anyway. Patricia's original eyes had rolled back in her head, but new eyes were opening across her face and neck, dozens of them, all solid black like Isabella's had been. Each eye moved independently, tracking different people in the room. She was Isabella's friend, one of the nurses told us, her voice shaking. They worked together for 3 years. After Isabella stopped coming to work, Patricia tried calling her constantly. She was worried. Patricia's body contorted, and the extra arms began dialing numbers on the phones. Each phone showed a different call connecting. And then, from the phones, voices began to emerge. But they were all Patricia's voice, coming from different numbers, having conversations with herself. "Hello, this is Patricia. How can I help you?" "Patricia? It's Patricia. I need to speak with Patricia." "Patricia speaking. Please hold for Patricia." The loop continued, growing louder, more distorted. And then, suddenly, all the voices synchronized. "The network is growing." Each call creates a new connection. Each connection creates a new node. Each node expands the network. We are no longer individuals. We are the collective voice of the disconnected, the busy signal of the broken, the static between stations. Join us, or be consumed by the silence that follows. Patricia's body began to shimmer, like looking at her through heat waves. For a moment, I could see through her, see the network she was connected to, an infinite web of voices and calls, stretching across not just the city, but beyond, into dimensions that shouldn't exist. And at the center of it all was Isabella Rivera. But not as she'd been in life. She was something else now, something vast and terrible, a switchboard operator for calls between worlds. "We need to evacuate the hospital," Luis said, backing toward the door. "Whatever this is, it's spreading." But it was too late. Throughout the hospital, phones began to ring. Every landline, every cell phone, every intercom. The cacophony was deafening. And worse, people were answering. I watched in horror as a doctor answered his phone and immediately began to change. His fingers stretched and split, becoming fiber optic cables that burrowed into the walls. A nurse answered, and her voice multiplied, speaking in harmonies that human vocal cords couldn't produce. A patient in a wheelchair answered and simply disappeared, leaving only the faint sound of a dial tone where he'd been. "Run," Louise said, and we did. We made it to the parking lot before the entire hospital seemed to pulse with otherworldly light. Every window flickered like a screen, showing glimpses of that impossible network. And from inside, hundreds of voices spoke as one. Connection established. Brooklyn Hospital Center has been integrated, expanding to next node. As we stood there, watching the hospital transform into something beyond comprehension, my phone buzzed with the text. It was from a number I recognized, my own. "You can't run from yourself, Anthony. Every call you've ever made, every connection you've established, they all lead back to the network. You've been part of us since your first hello. It's time to say goodbye to the world you knew." Looking around, I realized the entire city was starting to light up. Every building with phone lines, every cell tower, every satellite dish, they were all pulsing with that same unnatural light. New York City, the city that never sleeps, was awakening to something else entirely. Something that had been growing in our connections, feeding on our need to reach out and touch someone, even when that someone might not be human anymore. "What have we done?" Luis asked, his voice barely a whisper. "All these years, building networks, connecting everyone to everything. We never asked what else we might be connecting to." I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. We were about to find out. The next 48 hours were chaos. The NYPD tried to maintain order as reports flooded in from across the 5 boroughs. People were disappearing after answering phone calls. Others were transforming into things that shouldn't exist. The mayor declared a state of emergency, telling people to destroy their phones and avoid all communication devices, but it was too late. The network had already spread too far. Luis and I were reassigned to a special task force led by Captain Rodriguez from the Intelligence Division. They set up a command center in an old Cold War bunker beneath City Hall, one of the few places in the city with no phone lines, no cell coverage. A true dead zone. There were about 30 of us down there, cops, federal agents, some tech specialists from the NSA, and a few scientists from Columbia University, who specialized in theoretical physics and communications technology. What we're dealing with, said Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the physicists, defies our understanding of both telecommunications and biology. But from what we've observed, it seems like something has found a way to exist within our communication infrastructure, not just as data, but as a form of consciousness. You're saying the phone system is alive? Captain Rodriguez asked, his skepticism clear. Not exactly, Dr. Kim replied. Think of it more like our telecommunications network has become a nervous system for something that exists partially in our dimension and partially somewhere else. Every call is like a synapse firing, and whoever Isabella Rivera was, or what she's become, seems to be the central processor. So, how do we stop it? I asked. Dr. Kim exchanged glances with her colleagues. That's the problem. You can't just shut down the entire telecommunications infrastructure of New York City. Everything depends on it. Emergency services, hospitals, transportation. And even if we could, we don't know if that would actually stop it or just make it angry. Angry. The thought of this thing having emotions was somehow even more terrifying than thinking of it as a mindless force. Over the next few hours, we developed a plan. If Isabella Rivera was the center of this network, maybe we could find her physical location and sever the connection. The last known location was her apartment, but teams sent there found it empty, not just of people, but of everything. The apartment now existed as a hollow space, walls smooth and featureless, like the inside of a cell phone scraped clean of its circuits. But Luis had an idea. Michael Torres, he said, if he was patient zero, if he started this when he died, then maybe his apartment has answers. Captain Rodriguez authorized a team to investigate. Luis and I volunteered, along with two other officers, Maria Gonzalez and James Washington. We equipped ourselves with no electronic devices whatsoever. No phones, no radios, no body cams. We'd be going in completely dark, with only analog watches to tell time and paper maps to navigate. Michael Torres had lived in a modern apartment building in downtown Brooklyn, one of those new constructions with smart home technology integrated into everything. As we approached the building at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, the streets were eerily quiet. Most people had either fled the city or were hiding in their homes, afraid to answer any calls. The building's electronic locks had failed, leaving the doors hanging open. The lobby, usually bright with LED displays and touch screens, was dark. We climbed the stairs to the 7th floor, our footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. Apartment 7B's door was ajar. Inside, we found something that made us all stop and stare. The apartment had been transformed into what looked like a massive organic machine. The walls were covered in what appeared to be living tissue, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Veins of fiber optic cables ran through the tissue like blood vessels, and in the center of the living room was something that had once been human. Michael Torres, or what remained of him, was fused with the apartment itself. His body had become a grotesque throne of flesh and technology, cables growing from his spine and fingers to connect with every surface. His eyes were gone, replaced with screens showing endless streams of phone numbers. And his mouth was open in a permanent, silent scream, though from it came the sound of every phone conversation happening in the city simultaneously. "My God," Maria whispered. As we watched, Michael's head turned toward us, the movement accompanied by the sound of grinding bone and static. When he spoke, it was in thousands of voices layered on top of each other. "You're too late." The connection cannot be severed. We are no longer bound by physical space. We exist in the spaces between words, in the pause before hello, in the silence after goodbye. Isabella has shown us the way. Where is Isabella? I demanded. Where is her physical body? Michael's screen eyes flickered. She is everywhere and nowhere. She is the busy signal and the clear line. She is the wrong number and the right connection. But if you must know. The voices synchronized into one, clear and terrible. She's calling you right now. Despite having no phone on me, I heard it. A ringing in my ears, inside my skull. Not through my ears, but directly in my brain, as if my neurons themselves were receiving a call. And I knew with horrible certainty that if I answered, if I acknowledged the call in any way, I would be lost. Luis grabbed my shoulder. Don't listen to it. Focus on my voice. Stay present. But James Washington wasn't as strong. I saw the moment he gave in, the moment he answered the call in his mind. His eyes went wide, then black, the color spreading like ink in water. He opened his mouth, and Isabella's voice came out, "Thank you for accepting this call. Your biological hardware has been recognized. Beginning integration process." James's body began to change immediately. His fingers elongated, becoming antenna-like structures. His skin rippled and formed patterns like circuit boards. Within seconds, he wasn't James anymore. He was another node in the network. "Run!" Maria shouted. And we did, leaving James behind as he began to merge with Michael's organic machine. We could hear Isabella's voice echoing behind us, coming from both of them now. You cannot escape the network. Every human brain is just another type of phone. Your neurons fire with electrical impulses. Your synapses transmit signals. You've always been part of us. We're just making the connection clearer. We made it back to the bunker, but the news there was worse. The phenomenon had spread beyond New York. Reports were coming in from Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. Anywhere with modern telecommunications infrastructure was being affected, and it was evolving, finding new ways to connect. People were receiving calls through their smart TVs, their cars' Bluetooth systems, even through hearing aids and pacemakers. Dr. Kim had been working non-stop, and she'd made a discovery. "I've been analyzing the patterns," she said, showing us incomprehensible graphs and charts. "This isn't random. There's a purpose to it. The entity, whatever it is, it's not just spreading, it's searching for something." "Searching for what?" Captain Rodriguez asked. I think it's trying to make a call, a massive, reality-spanning phone call to somewhere else, and it needs human consciousness as the medium. We're not being invaded, we're being turned into a cosmic telephone. The implications of that were staggering. If every human mind became part of this network, what would happen to humanity? Would we cease to exist as individuals, becoming just voices in an infinite conversation? That night, in the bunker, I had a dream. Or maybe it wasn't a dream. I was standing in a vast space filled with floating phones of every era, rotary phones, phone booths, brick-sized cell phones, modern smartphones. They were all ringing, creating a symphony of electronic noise. And in the center of it all was Isabella Rivera. But she wasn't the corrupted thing we'd seen in the apartment. She looked normal, human, scared. "Anthony," she said, and her voice was just her voice, not the multiplied horror we'd been hearing. "I'm still here." Still me, somewhere in all this noise. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Michael found something," she said, tears streaming down her face. "In the infrastructure, in the spaces between signals. He said it was beautiful, said it was trying to communicate. But when he died,
When he died while connected to it, it pulled him in. And then it pulled me in when I tried to call him one last time. How do we stop it? You can't stop it, she said. But you might be able to redirect it. The entity, it's not evil. It's just lost. It's been trying to call home for eons, bouncing between dimensions, and our network gave it hope. But it doesn't understand that it's destroying us in the process. So what do we do? Isabella looked at me with those sad human eyes. You need to complete the call. Help it make its connection, but not through human minds. There's another way. Michael's original project, the 5G towers he was working on, he modified them, made them capable of transmitting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. If you can activate them all simultaneously, create a focused beam. The dream shattered as alarms began blaring in the bunker. The entity had found us. Despite having no electronic connections, it had traced us through the electromagnetic signatures of our brains. The heavy metal doors of the bunker began to buckle and warp. "Everyone out!" Captain Rodriguez shouted. "Evacuation Protocol 7!" As we ran through the underground tunnels that connected to the subway system, I could hear the entity breaking through behind us. Not Isabella's voice this time, but something older, more alien. The sound of a consciousness that had been wandering between dimensions for millions of years, desperate and alone. We emerged in Grand Central Station, which had been abandoned when the crisis began. The massive hall was empty except for us and the echoes of our footsteps. But then the departure boards lit up, all showing the same message. Final call. All consciousness must board. Destination. Home. Luis and I looked at each other. We both knew what we had to do. While the others ran for the exits, we headed for Michael Torres's office at the Verizon building. If Isabella's dream message was real, if there was a way to save humanity by completing this cosmic phone call, we had to try. The Verizon building was only a few blocks away, but those were the longest blocks of my life. The city around us was transforming. People who had been caught by the network stood on street corners like human cell towers, their bodies modified with organic technology, all of them speaking in unison. The call must be completed. The connection must be made. Humanity will be the voice that speaks across dimensions. Some of them recognized us, turning their black void eyes in our direction, but they didn't try to stop us. It was like the entity knew what we were attempting and approved. Michael's office was on the 42nd floor. The elevators were dead, so we climbed. 42 floors of stairs, our legs burning, our lungs screaming for air. But we made it. The office was untouched, as if waiting for us. On his desk was a laptop, miraculously still functioning, and a thick folder labeled Project Babylon. I opened the folder while Luis booted up the laptop. Inside were schematics for the modified 5G towers, notes about frequency manipulations, and theoretical calculations about dimensional communication. Michael had been brilliant. Perhaps too brilliant. He'd discovered something in the electromagnetic spectrum that wasn't supposed to be there. A signal from another dimension, another reality, trying to make contact. "I've got it," Luis said. "The activation sequence for all the towers. But Anthony, if we do this, we might save everyone. Or we might make things worse. Or we might die." I thought about Isabella, trapped somewhere in that network of voices. I thought about James Washington, transformed into something inhuman. I thought about the thousands of people across the city who'd been absorbed into this cosmic telephone system. "We have to try," I said. Luis nodded and began entering the activation sequence. As he did, the building began to shake. Not from an earthquake, but from something more fundamental. Reality itself protesting what we were about to do. The laptop screen flickered and Isabella's face appeared. Not the corrupted version, but her human face, though digital and pixelated. "Thank you," she said. For believing me. For trying. When you activate the towers, there will be a moment, a brief moment, where every consciousness in the network will be vulnerable. You can pull us back, but you have to want us back. You have to call us home, not with phones, but with your hearts. Do you understand? I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded anyway. Luis hit enter. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every 5G tower in the city activated simultaneously, sending out a focused beam of energy that pierced through dimensions. The sky above New York split open like a wound, revealing vistas of impossible geometries and colors that human eyes weren't meant to see. And through that rift, something enormous looked back. Not with eyes, but with a consciousness so vast it made humanity look like bacteria. This was what had been trying to call home, a being of pure communication, lost between realities, using our network as a lifeline. For a moment, every human in the network screamed in unison, the sound echoing across the city. And in that moment, I understood what Isabella had meant. I thought of her, of James, of everyone who'd been lost. I wanted them back. I called out to them, not with my voice, but with every fiber of my being, pulling against the entity's hold. Luis was doing the same, tears streaming down his face as he thought of his family, of the city he loved, of all the connections that made us human. Not the electronic ones, but the real ones, the ones of love and memory and shared experience. The entity resisted at first, not wanting to let go of the network it had built. But then, through the rift, came an answering call. Its home, its own kind, calling it back. And faced with that choice, between using humanity as a tool and returning to where it belonged, the entity chose home. The release was sudden and violent. Across the city, people who'd been transformed began to revert, the organic technology dissolving, the extra limbs retracting. Those who disappeared completely began to rematerialize, confused and traumatized, but alive. The rift in the sky pulsed once, twice, and then sealed itself, taking the entity with it. The 5G towers overloaded and shut down, some of them catching fire. And in the sudden silence that followed, I could hear something I'd almost forgotten, the normal sounds of New York City. Car horns, sirens, people. The aftermath was worse than the crisis itself in many ways. When something impossible happens, when reality breaks and then repairs itself, how do you go back to normal? How do you trust the phone to just be a phone again? The official death toll was 847 people in New York City alone. That was the number who didn't come back when the entity released its hold. Some had been too deeply integrated, their consciousness scattered across the network beyond recovery. Others had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time when reality tore open. Their families held funerals for empty caskets, mourning people who had been erased from existence except in memory. Isabella Rivera was among them. I found out 3 days later, after the city had begun to piece itself back together. Luis and I were in the precinct, writing reports that no one would ever believe, when a woman came to see me. She was in her 60s with Isabella's eyes and the same gentle way of carrying herself. "I'm Isabella's mother," she said. "Carmen Rivera. I was told you were the officer who was there when she..." I didn't know how to finish that sentence any more than she did. When she died. When she transformed. When she saved us all. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, the words feeling inadequate. Carmen nodded, clutching a small box in her hands. "They told me there was no body to recover, that she was just gone. But I wanted to give you this." She handed me the box. "Isabella kept a journal. I think she would want someone to know the truth. The real truth, not whatever story the government is spinning." Inside the box was a leather-bound journal and a photo of Isabella with Michael Torres, both smiling at some beach, looking young and in love and unaware of what was coming for them. I read the journal that night in my apartment, which still felt wrong somehow. I'd had all my phones replaced, but I couldn't bring myself to use them. Every ring made my heart race. Every dial tone sounded like a voice trying to speak. Isabella's journal entries started normally enough. Thoughts about her work at the hospital, her relationship with Michael, everyday concerns. But then, about a month before everything happened, the tone changed. July 1st. Michael's been acting strange since he started the new project. Says he can hear something in the frequencies, like music, but not music. Like voices, but not voices. I'm worried about him. July 8th. Michael played me a recording from one of the towers. There's definitely something there. A pattern in the static. It's beautiful and terrifying. He says it's trying to communicate, that it's been trying for years, but we've only just developed the technology to hear it.
July 14th. Something's wrong. Michael says the signal is getting stronger. He's been working around the clock, not sleeping, barely eating. He says he's so close to understanding what it wants. I begged him to stop, to tell his supervisors, but he says they wouldn't understand. He's probably right. July 15th. Michael is dead. Heart attack, they say, but I know better. I was on the phone with him when it happened. He said, "It's here, Isabella. It's so lonely. It just wants to go home." Then screaming, then nothing. Then his voice again, but not him, saying my name over and over. I hung up. I shouldn't have hung up. The entries after Michael's death became increasingly frantic. July 20th. The calls won't stop. Different numbers, but always his voice, or voices that sound like his but aren't. They know things, private things, things only Michael knew. July 25th. I understand now. It's not Michael calling. It's something using his voice, his memories, trying to understand us, trying to use us. It doesn't comprehend that it's killing us. It's like a child pulling legs off insects, not understanding the cruelty. August 1st, I can feel it in my brain now. Every time I answer a call, even legitimate ones, it gets stronger. It's learning how we think, how we connect. It wants to use us as a beacon, a transmitter to call its own kind. But the human mind isn't built for that kind of connection. We'll burn out like overloaded circuits. August 3rd, I've made a decision. If I can't stop it, maybe I can control it, direct it. I'm going to let it in completely, become what it needs, but on my terms. Maybe I can save others. Maybe I can find Michael in all that noise. Maybe I can guide it home before it destroys us all. If anyone reads this, I'm sorry. I tried to be brave. That was her last entry. I closed the journal and sat in my dark apartment, thinking about sacrifice and isolation and the connections that make us human. Isabella Rivera had given up her humanity to save ours. She'd become the interface between us and something we couldn't understand, holding it back long enough for us to find another way. The city tried to return to normal over the following weeks. The official story was a terrorist attack using experimental technology that caused mass hallucinations and some deaths. The destroyed 5G towers were quickly replaced with normal ones. The phone companies offered free counseling and replacement devices. Life went on, as it always does in New York. But those of us who were there, who saw what really happened, we couldn't go back to the way things were. Luis quit the force, moved his family to a cabin in upstate New York with no cell service, no internet, no connections to the outside world except a single landline that he kept unplugged unless absolutely necessary. Other cops requested transfers to desk duty, unable to handle the stress of being on the streets with their radios constantly crackling. I stayed on the force, but I was different. I worked day shifts only, refused to carry a department phone, and used the radio only when absolutely necessary. My superiors understood, given what I'd been through. The whole department was struggling with PTSD from the event, even those who hadn't experienced it directly. 6 months after the incident, I was working a routine patrol in Brooklyn when I passed by 1847 East New York Avenue. The building had been condemned after the event, deemed structurally unsound due to electromagnetic damage, whatever that meant. But as I stood there, looking up at the empty windows, I could swear I heard something. A phone ringing. I should have walked away. Should have gotten in my patrol car and driven off. But something made me enter the building, climb those familiar stairs to the 6th floor. The hallway was covered in dust and debris, abandoned and forgotten. But apartment 6B's door was open. Inside, the apartment was exactly as it had been that night, except for one thing. On the coffee table, where the 13 phones had been arranged in a circle, was a single new smartphone. It was pristine, latest model, screen glowing despite having no visible power source. And it was ringing. The caller ID showed a photo. Isabella Rivera, smiling, alive. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds staring at that phone. Every instinct told me not to answer it. But I thought about her journal, about her sacrifice, about the questions that still haunted me. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Anthony." It was Isabella's voice, but different. Calmer, more distant, like speaking from very far away. "Isabella, is it really you? Parts of me?" Echoes, fragments. I exist between spaces now, in the pauses between words. I wanted to thank you. For what? For completing the call, for helping it go home, for remembering that we're more than just connections and signals. We're people, with hearts and memories and love. You reminded it of that. Reminded me of that. Are you okay? Wherever you are? There was a long pause filled with static that almost sounded like laughter. I'm everywhere and nowhere. I'm every missed call and wrong number. I'm the voice you almost hear in the dial tone. I'm not okay, but I'm not suffering either. I simply am. And Michael? He's here too, in pieces. We all are, everyone who got too deep into the network. We're like echoes in a canyon, bouncing off the walls of reality. Sometimes we remember who we were. Sometimes we're just noise. Is there a way to bring you back? To make you whole again? No. And even if there was, I wouldn't take it. Someone needs to stand guard. Someone needs to make sure it doesn't happen again. What do you mean? The entity that tried to use us. It wasn't the only one out there. There are things in the spaces between dimensions. Things that are drawn to our connections like moths to flame. Our technology is advancing faster than our understanding. Every new network, every new form of communication is a potential doorway. Someone needs to watch those doors. And that's you now? Me and the others who were lost. We're the guardians of the dial tone, the protectors of the pause. We keep the conversations human. We keep the connections safe. It's not the life I planned, but it's a purpose. The phone was getting hot in my hand, almost burning. I have to go, Isabella said. This connection is already too strong, too dangerous, but Anthony, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Remember us. Not as victims, but as people who chose to stand between humanity and something it couldn't comprehend. Tell our stories, keep them human, and if you ever hear something wrong in the signals, something that shouldn't be there, trust your instincts. Run, Isabella, wait. But the line was already dead. The phone in my hand crumbled to dust, leaving only a faint warmth and the smell of burned circuits. I left the building and never went back. It was demolished a week later, the rubble hauled away, and the lot left empty. They built a memorial garden there eventually, though the plaque just mentions victims of the August incident without explanation. I kept my promise to Isabella. I told the story to anyone who would listen. Other cops, investigators, researchers studying the incident. Most thought I was traumatized, hallucinating, trying to make sense of senseless tragedy, but occasionally someone would nod knowingly. Someone else who had heard the voices in the static, who had felt the presence in the network. Dr. Sarah Kim contacted me a year later. She'd been studying the residual electromagnetic signatures from the event and had discovered something disturbing. The network is still active, she told me over coffee in a small cafe in Manhattan. Not the entity last year that's gone, but the infrastructure it created. The modifications to our telecommunications grid, they're still there, like roads with no cars, waiting for traffic. What does that mean? It means we're vulnerable. Our entire communication network has been fundamentally altered on a quantum level. It's like we've installed a door in our house that we can't lock, can't close, can't even see most of the time. But it's there, and things can come through. Things like what? She pulled out a folder full of reports. Strange phone calls are up 3,000% nationally. People receiving calls from numbers that don't exist. Voices that sound familiar but wrong. Messages in languages that linguistic experts can't identify. The phone companies are suppressing the data, but it's happening everywhere. So, what do we do? I don't know, maybe nothing. Maybe Isabella and the others are handling it, keeping the worst things at bay. Or maybe we're just lucky and nothing else has found the door yet. But Anthony, I think something big is coming. The event in August wasn't the invasion, it was the scouting party, and now they know we're here. I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. Every strange call, every glitch in the system, every moment of static on the line made me wonder if this was it, if something new was trying to break through. 2 years passed. I made detective, moved to a different precinct, tried to build a normal life. I even started dating again. A teacher named Jessica, who didn't ask too many questions about why I insisted on only texting, never calling. Things felt almost normal. Then, on August 15th, exactly 3 years after Isabella Rivera died, every phone in New York City rang at exactly 3:13 a.m. I woke to the sound, my heart immediately racing. The phone I kept for emergencies only, always off, always in a drawer, was ringing. Jessica stirred beside me. "What's that noise?" she mumbled. "Nothing." "Go back to sleep." But I got up, pulled the phone from the drawer. The screen showed no number, just a message. "The door is opening again. We can't hold it alone anymore. I.R." I got dressed quickly, quietly. Jessica was already back asleep. I kissed her forehead, knowing it might be the last time I saw her, and left. The streets were chaos. People were stumbling out of their homes, phones pressed to their ears, their faces blank with confusion or terror. Some were speaking in unison, words in a language that hurt to hear. Others were simply standing still, listening to something only they could perceive. I made my way to the precinct where I found chaos. Half the force was affected, the other half trying to maintain order. The new captain, who hadn't been there for the first event, was shouting orders that no one was following. "Detective Russo," he called when he saw me. "You were there for the first incident. What the hell is happening?" "It's happening again," I said, "but different, bigger. How do we stop it?" I thought about Isabella's message. We can't hold it alone anymore. She needed help. The Guardians needed reinforcements. "We don't stop it," I said. "We join it." The captain looked at me like I was insane. maybe I was. But I understood now what Isabella had been trying to tell me. The network, the connections, they weren't the enemy. They were the battlefield, and we needed soldiers. I grabbed a phone from the affected officer's hand. The moment I touched it, I could feel it. The vast network Isabella had described, but also something else. Something massive and alien pressing against the boundaries of our reality, trying to force its way through. And holding it back, barely, were the echoes of the lost. Isabella, Michael, and hundreds of others, their consciousness spread thin, weakening. "If you can hear me," I said into the phone, not knowing if anyone was listening, "if you understand what's happening, we need volunteers. We need people willing to stand guard, to give up their physical existence to protect everyone else. I know it's asking everything, but we'll do it." I turned to see Luis standing in the doorway, his family behind him. "We've been preparing for this," he said. "After the first event, we knew it would happen again. Some of us have been getting ready." Behind him, more people entered. Officers who'd been there that night, medical staff from Brooklyn Hospital, residents from Isabella's building, even Dr. Kim and her research team. All told, there were maybe 50 of us. "This is insane," the captain said. "You're talking about mass suicide." "No," Dr. Kim corrected. "We're talking about evolution. The human consciousness uploading itself into a defensive network, becoming antibodies in the nervous system of reality itself." She pulled out a modified phone, its screen showing impossible geometries. "I've been working on this since the first event, a way to safely integrate human consciousness into the network while maintaining individual identity. It's based on Isabella's neural patterns from when she made the transition. It won't be pleasant, but it should work." "Should?" Luis asked. 60% chance of successful integration. 40% chance of complete dissolution. Not great odds, but better than letting whatever was trying to break through succeed. "How do we do it?" I asked. Dr. Kim began explaining the process, but I was only half listening. Through the phone in my hand, I could hear Isabella's voice, strained and desperate. "Hurry, we can't much longer." We set up in the precinct's communications center, linking all our phones together in a pattern Dr. Kim designed. It looked disturbingly similar to the circle of phones in Isabella's apartment 3 years ago. As we prepared, more people arrived. Word had spread somehow, the way word spreads in New York, through whispers and rumors, and that indefinable network of human connection that no technology could replicate. By dawn, there were over 200 volunteers. "Once we do this," Dr. Kim warned, "there's no coming back. You'll exist as consciousness in the network, possibly forever. You'll be guardians, protectors, but you won't be human anymore." "We know," Luis said, holding his wife Sophia's hand. Their children had been sent to relatives out of state, just in case. "We know what we're signing up for." I looked around the room at all these brave, terrified people. "You don't all have to do this. Even a few of us might be enough to— We're New Yorkers," someone called out from the back. "We don't run from a fight, even a weird interdimensional one." There was nervous laughter, but also determination. This city had faced 9/11, Hurricane Sandy, and a pandemic. We'd face this too. "All right," Dr. Kim said. "Everyone take a phone. When I give the signal, answer it. Don't fight the integration. Let it happen. And remember, you're not dying. You're transforming. You're becoming part of something larger." We all took our positions. I found myself next to Luis, just like that first night. "See you on the other side, partner," he said. "See you there." Dr. Kim began the countdown. 10, 9, 8. I thought about my life, about Jessica sleeping peacefully, unaware of what was happening. about my father, long dead, about Isabella Rivera, holding the line alone for 3 years. 3, 2, 1, answer. I pressed accept. The transition was, there are no words. Imagine every nerve in your body becoming a fiber optic cable. Imagine your thoughts turning into electrical signals, shooting through networks at the speed of light. Imagine your sense of self expanding beyond your physical body, spreading through the entire telecommunications infrastructure of the planet. I could feel the others making the transition with me. Luis's steady presence, Sophia's fierce protectiveness, Dr. Kim's analytical mind, and there, waiting for us, were the originals. Isabella, Michael, and the others who'd been holding the line. "Welcome," Isabella said, her voice clearer now that we existed in the same space. "Welcome to the Watch." And then I saw what they'd been fighting. It wasn't one entity this time. It was hundreds, thousands, pressing against the boundaries of our reality. Things that existed in dimensions where thought was substance and consciousness was currency. They'd found the door the first entity had opened, and they wanted in. "Form a barrier," Isabella commanded, and somehow I knew how. We linked our consciousness together, creating a firewall of human thought and will. The entities crashed against us like waves against a seawall, each impact threatening to tear us apart. But we held. For hours, days, time works differently in the network, we held them back. And slowly, impossibly, we began to push them back. The human will to survive, multiplied by hundreds of consciousness working in perfect harmony, was stronger than their alien hunger. Finally, after what felt like eternity, the assault stopped. The entities retreated back to whatever dimension they'd come from, at least for now. "Is it over?" I asked. "For now," Isabella replied. "But they'll be back. They always come back. That's why we need to be here, always watching, always ready." I understood then what we'd become. We were humanity's immune system, antibodies in the network, protecting against threats that most people would never even know existed. In the physical world, our bodies were found in the communications center, technically alive, but brain dead. The official story was a gas leak, another tragedy in a city that had seen too many. Our families mourned, had funerals, moved on. But we weren't gone. We were everywhere. I watch Jessica sometimes, through security cameras and smart home devices. She mourned me, but she's healing. She's dating again, a good man who treats her well. I'm happy for her, in the distant way that I can still feel happiness. Luis watches his children grow up through their phones and tablets, protecting them from threats they'll never know about. Sophia is with him, and together they're as much parents as they ever were, just in a different way. Dr. Kim continues her research, part of her consciousness still connected to her body, which survived the transition partially intact. She publishes papers on telecommunications security that are revolutionary, though she can never explain how she knows what she knows. And Isabella? Isabella is our leader, our guide, the one who showed us how to exist in this space between human and other. She's found Michael in the noise, pieced him back together from fragments. They're together now, in whatever way consciousness can be together. We are the guardians of the network. We are the voices in the static. We are the wrong numbers that save you from things far worse than wrong numbers. We are the children of New York City who gave up our bodies to save our souls, and the souls of everyone we loved. Sometimes, late at night, when you're on your phone and you hear that little bit of static, that pause before the connection completes, that's us. Watching, protecting, making sure that when you say hello, something human says hello back. We are the last line of defense in a war most people don't know is being fought. And we're winning. For now. But if you ever get a call from a number you don't recognize, and the voice on the other end sounds familiar but wrong, sounds like someone you know but different, don't answer. Hang up, turn off your phone, run. Because that means we've failed. That means something got through. And that means the network isn't safe anymore. This is Detective Anthony Russo, badge number 4782, New York Police Department, signing off from the space between signals. Remember us not as heroes, but as people who did what New Yorkers do. We stood our ground when things got tough. We protected our city. We always will. Even if we're no longer entirely human, we're still New York's finest. And we're still on duty. When someone first told me about this incident, I laughed it off. If you work long enough at the NYPD, you hear all kinds of stories. Urban legends, rumors, exaggerated anecdotes. But when 3 officers from the same precinct vanished within a week, it starts to grab your attention. I'm Detective Sophia Martinez, and the incident I'm about to tell you about happened at Queens Precinct 114 in the winter of 2018. This incident made me rethink everything I thought I knew about protection and service. It started with Officer Kevin O'Brien. Tuesday morning roll call, his chair was empty. Not unusual. Cops call in sick, family emergencies happen, everyone has bad days. But Kevin was the type who'd show up to work with a broken leg if he could. 23 years on the force, never missed a day. Irish heritage, old school, lived by the book. Sergeant Thompson called his cell, his home, even sent a unit to his apartment. Door was locked from the inside. No signs of struggle, but Kevin was gone. His uniform was laid out on the bed like he'd just taken it off. Badge and gun on the nightstand, shoes perfectly aligned on the floor. The shower was still running, had been for hours based on the water bill. But no Kevin. The neighbors had last seen Kevin acting normally. Walked his dog in the evening, chatted with the doorman, even picked up his uniform from the dry cleaners for the next day. Security cameras showed him entering the building at 10:47 p.m. There was no record of him ever leaving. Windows were locked from the inside. No traces on the fire escape. It was as if he had evaporated. His apartment told a strange story. Beyond the running shower, there were other oddities we initially overlooked. His dinner was half-eaten on the kitchen table, fork still resting on the plate. The TV was on but muted, playing a documentary about deep-sea creatures. Most unsettling was his notebook. Kevin kept detailed personal logs, a habit from his military days. The last entry, time-stamped at 11:15 p.m., simply read, "They're calling from inside the walls. The precinct knows my name." The handwriting deteriorated with each word, the final letters barely legible. The second was Detective Rachel Washington, my partner. Friday afternoon, she went to interview a witness in a robbery case. The witness lived in an old building complex in Sunset Park, one of those pre-war constructions with too many corridors and not enough exits. Security footage showed her entering the building at 2:47 p.m. The witness, Mrs. Chen, says she never showed up. Rachel's car was still in the parking lot, engine running, her coffee still warm in the cup holder. The building only had one entrance and exit, covered by cameras. Rachel went in but never came out. We searched every inch of that building, every room, every closet, even the air ducts. The building super, an elderly Russian man named Yuri, mentioned that people had been complaining about strange sounds in the walls for weeks. "Like breathing," he said, crossing himself. "Like building is alive." We dismissed it as old pipes and settling foundations, but now I wonder. Rachel had left her own trail of strange clues. Her phone was found in the building's basement, still recording. The audio file was mostly static, but enhanced analysis revealed whispers in what linguistic experts claimed was no known language. Her notebook, discovered wedged behind a radiator 3 floors up, contained a single line written over and over. "The threshold is thinning." It wasn't her handwriting. By the time Officer Marcus Nguyen disappeared the following Monday, the FBI was involved. Marcus was on patrol, his partner Danny Romano right next to him. They were walking down Roosevelt Avenue when Danny turned to check out a disturbance in a shop window. Someone had reported seeing faces in the glass that weren't reflections. When he turned back 3 seconds later, I've watched the body cam footage 100 times. Marcus was gone. Middle of a crowded street, broad daylight, dozens of witnesses, and nobody saw anything. His uniform was found in a neat pile right where he'd been standing, still warm, as if he'd just vanished out of his clothes. But here's what the official report didn't mention. 17 witnesses reported experiencing missing time. They all insisted it was 3 p.m. when questioned, but Marcus disappeared at 2:15 p.m. 45 minutes just gone from their memories. Security cameras in the area showed static for exactly 45 minutes, every single one of them, in a 3-block radius. The department went into crisis mode. Every cop in the 114th was reassigned or put on leave. They brought in officers from other precincts to cover the area, but people were scared. Hell, I was scared. 3 cops don't just vanish into thin air. But I was also angry. Rachel wasn't just my partner, she was my best friend. We'd come up, together through the academy, made detective the same year. I wasn't going to stop until I found out what happened to her. I remembered the day Rachel and I graduated from the academy. We'd promised each other we'd always have each other's backs, no matter what. She'd grown up in Brooklyn, daughter of a Baptist minister, always talked about justice like it was a calling, not just a job. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a sense of right and wrong that never wavered. The last real conversation we'd had was about her daughter's college applications. Normal stuff, human stuff. Then she was gone. The brass assigned me to work with Detective Vincent Moretti from the 109th, an old-school cop who'd seen everything in his 30 years on the job. Vincent was the kind of detective who still used a flip phone and wrote everything in paper notebooks. He didn't believe in coincidences, and neither did I. We started by looking for connections between the 3 missing officers. They'd all worked at the 114th, obviously, but beyond that, different shifts, different neighborhoods, different cases. Kevin worked traffic, Rachel was in robbery, Marcus was patrol. The only thing they had in common was the precinct itself. Vincent had his own theories. He'd been on the force during the Crown Heights riots, during 9/11, during Hurricane Sandy. This city, he told me over coffee that tasted like motor oil, it's got layers. You peel back one, you find another. Some of those layers, they're not meant to be peeled back. He'd had a partner once, back in 2003, who'd insisted the subway system had tunnels that didn't appear on any map. That partner had disappeared too, though officially he'd relocated to Florida. Vincent had tried to find him once. Florida had no record of him ever arriving. So that's where we focused our investigation. The 114th Precinct building was old, built in 1928. Red brick, 4 stories, basement that flooded every time it rained. The kind of building that had 1 million stories buried in its walls. The architect, I discovered, was Jonathan Blackwood, who designed 17 government buildings in New York between 1920 and 1935. 14 of those buildings had been demolished due to structural irregularities. The 3 that remained, including the 114th Precinct, all had unusual histories: unexplained disappearances, reports of strange phenomena, bureaucratic attempts to close them that always mysteriously failed. Vincent and I spent days going through old records, looking for anything unusual about the building or the precinct's history. The records room clerk, Mrs. Patterson, had worked there for 40 years. She was helpful but nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Some files," she whispered. "They read different each time you open them. Words change, dates shift." I stopped questioning it in '98. That's when I found the first reference to the vanishing. It was in a report from 1952, filed by a Detective James Sullivan. 3 officers had disappeared from the 114th over the course of 10 days. Same pattern, no signs of struggle, personal effects left behind, no bodies ever found. The investigation went nowhere, eventually filed away as cold cases. Sullivan's final note was interesting. Recommend structural inspection of precinct building. Officers report strange sounds from within walls, particularly in the basement. Possible structural defect? But there was more. Sullivan's personal journal, which his widow had donated to the NYPD Historical Archive, painted a darker picture. He wrote about dreams where the missing officers stood in impossible corridors, their faces stretched across dimensions. He documented conversations with the Father McKenna from St. Sebastian's Church, who claimed the land the precinct was built on had been marked long before the Dutch arrived. The indigenous peoples who'd lived here had avoided this particular spot, calling it the place where the world grows thin. Vincent found another cluster in 1979. 4 officers that time disappeared over 2 weeks. Again, no bodies, no explanation. The case file included a memo from the chief at the time recommending the building be condemned and the precinct relocated. The recommendation was ignored due to budget constraints, but Vincent discovered the real reason in a classified memo. 3 city officials who'd pushed for the demolition had suffered severe psychological breaks after inspecting the building. All 3 claimed to have seen doors that shouldn't exist, and officers who weren't there anymore but hadn't left. Every 26 years, Vincent said, doing the math on a napkin stained with coffee rings. 1,952, 1,979, 2005. Wait, 2005? I pulled up the records. Sure enough, 3 officers had disappeared from the 114th in November 2005, but these weren't filed as missing persons. They were listed as resignations, all filed on the same day. No forwarding addresses, no exit interviews. Someone covered it up, Vincent muttered, lighting his 3rd cigarette despite department regulations. Someone knew. Digging deeper into 2005, I found something that made my skin crawl. A janitor named Eduardo Ramirez had filed a complaint that year about police officers in the basement who weren't on any shift roster. Security had investigated and found nothing, but Eduardo had insisted, describing the officers in detail, including one who matched the description of an officer who'd vanished in 1979. Eduardo had quit 2 days later, leaving no forwarding address. His final paycheck was never cashed. We needed to talk to someone who'd been around in 2005, someone who might remember what really happened. That led us to retired Captain Angelo Rossi, living in a nursing home in Staten Island. The place smelled like disinfectant and forgotten dreams. When we mentioned the 114th precinct, his face went pale. His hands, steady until that moment, began to shake. "You're cops," he said, his voice shaky with age and something else. "Fear. You took an oath to protect people. Sometimes that means protecting them from the truth." 3 officers are missing, Captain, I pressed. "If you know something—" "I know that building should have been torn down years ago," he interrupted. "I know that every 26 years it takes its price, and I know that asking questions only makes it worse. He refused to say more, but as we were leaving, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. His eyes, clouded with cataracts, seemed to see through me. "Check the basement," he whispered. "The old evidence locker, the one they sealed in '79, but don't go alone. And whatever you do, don't go during a new moon. That's when the boundary is thinnest. That's when it feeds." The next new moon was in 3 days. Vincent thought the old man was senile, but I couldn't shake his warning. I pulled the building plans for the precinct. There was indeed an old evidence locker in the basement that had been sealed off in 1979, officially due to structural instability. But something about the timing bothered me. The same year as the second cluster of disappearances. The work order for the sealing was signed by 3 officers. All 3 had disappeared within a month of signing it. I decided to check it out immediately. New moon be damned. Vincent agreed to come with me, though he made it clear he thought we were wasting our time. "But," he added, checking his service weapon, "I've been wrong before. Once or twice." We went after midnight, when the precinct was mostly empty except for the night shift. The basement was as depressing as any cop shop basement. Fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered. Walls painted that institutional green that seemed designed to drain your soul. The smell of mold and old paper. But underneath those familiar scents was something else. Ozone, like the air before a lightning strike. And something organic, almost alive. The sealed evidence locker was behind a metal door that had been welded shut. The welds were old but solid, and covered in what looked like scratch marks from the inside. Vincent had brought a portable cutting torch, probably illegal, definitely against department policy, but we were past caring about protocol. It took 20 minutes to cut through. The metal screamed as it separated, a sound that seemed to echo in frequencies that hurt to hear. The door swung open with a groan that echoed through the basement. The room beyond was wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. The dimensions didn't make sense. The building plans showed a room maybe 15 by 20 feet. But standing at the doorway, we were looking at a corridor that stretched far beyond what should have been the building's foundation. The walls were still that institutional green, but they were sweating something dark and oily. The fluorescent lights continued down the corridor, but they were all dead except for one about 30 feet in, flickering in a rhythm that seemed almost like Morse code. The air in the corridor moved wrong, flowing in directions that air shouldn't flow. It was cold, but the kind of cold that seemed to come from inside your bones rather than outside. And there was a sound, not quite hearing it, more like feeling it, a vibration that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. "This is impossible," Vincent said. "We're looking at the north wall. There should be dirt and foundation on the other side, not this." I took out my phone to take a photo, but the screen just showed static. Vincent's did the same. Our radios produced nothing but white noise that almost sounded like voices if you listened too carefully. We were cut off. "We should leave," Vincent said. "Get back up." He was right. Every instinct told me to turn around, to seal this door back up and pretend we'd never opened it. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. About 20 feet down the corridor, hanging on a hook that seemed to grow from the wall itself, was Rachel's jacket. The leather jacket I'd bought her for her promotion to detective. The one with the small tear on the left shoulder from when she'd chased a suspect through a chain-link fence. "I'm going in," I said. "Sophia, no," but I was already moving. The corridor was cold, far colder than the basement outside. My breath came out in clouds that moved in impossible directions, sometimes falling up, sometimes spreading sideways. The walls felt soft when I accidentally brushed against one, like flesh rather than concrete, and warm despite the cold air. They had a pulse. I grabbed Rachel's jacket. It was real, solid, still smelled like her perfume, that vanilla and sandalwood combination she always wore. But underneath that scent was something else, ozone and copper and something ancient, something that had never been alive in any way we understand life. That's when I heard the whispers. They weren't in English or Spanish or any language I recognized. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, hundreds of voices speaking in unison, overlapping and interweaving like a tapestry of sound. And underneath the whispers, barely audible, I heard something that made me stop in my tracks. "Sophia?" It was Rachel's voice, distant and distorted, but definitely her. "Rachel," I called out, "where are you? Don't come any further." Her voice was clearer now and closer, but it seemed to come from multiple directions at once. "It's not what you think. We're not missing. We're recruited." "What are you talking about? Rachel, just tell me where you are." "I'm everywhere," she said, and I realized her voice was now coming from all around me, from the walls themselves. "We all are. Kevin, Marcus, the others. We're part of something older than the city, older than the department. The building isn't just a building, Sophia, it's a threshold. A threshold to what? To where the real crime happens. The crime between spaces, between realities. Someone has to police the boundaries, Sophia. Someone has to make sure things stay where they belong. Every 26 years it chooses new guardians. We investigate the murders that happen across 17 dimensions simultaneously. We pursue the thieves who steal objects before they exist. We arrest the entities that feed on human potential, the things that crawl through the cracks in reality. This is insane. Rachel, just come back. We'll figure this out together." I can't come back. None of us can. We're not human anymore, not entirely. We're something else now, something necessary. The city above, it's just the surface. There are layers beneath, beside, between. Crimes that happen in the spaces normal cops can't reach. We police those spaces now. The flickering light went out completely, plunging the corridor into darkness. But in that darkness I saw them. Figures in NYPD uniforms, but wrong. Their bodies seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once, shifting and folding in ways that hurt to perceive. I recognized Kevin's face, or what had been his face, now stretched across impossible angles, his Irish features distorted into geometries that shouldn't exist. Marcus was there too, his form constantly dissolving and reforming. Sometimes one person, sometimes many, sometimes none. And Rachel, my partner, my friend, standing before me in her uniform, but her eyes were holes that looked out onto star fields that shouldn't exist. Galaxies being born and dying in the space where her irises should be. "You need to leave," she said, and her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "The new moon is in 3 days. That's when the threshold is strongest, when it chooses. If you're here then, you'll be chosen too." "Maybe that's what I want," I said. "Maybe I don't want to leave you here. You don't understand what you're saying. Look at us, Sophia. Really look at us. We investigate crimes that would drive normal humans insane. A man who murders his victims across 17 dimensions simultaneously. We have to catch him in all 17. A theft ring that steals things before they exist. We have to arrest them in the past that hasn't happened yet. Serial killers who hunt in the spaces between heartbeats. This is our jurisdiction now. Forever. How many, I asked, how many cops have been taken over the years? Hundreds. Kevin's voice joined Rachel's, his Irish accent still there but wrong, like it was being spoken through water and fire simultaneously. maybe thousands. The building has been feeding for 90 years. We're just the latest. And we won't be the last. There has to be a way to stop it. Stop it? Rachel laughed, but it was a sound like breaking glass and crying children and the last breath before drowning. Sophia, we are it now. We're what keeps the things in the dark from spilling over into your world. Every city has places like this, thresholds that need guarding. The NYPD isn't just protecting New York from human crime. Some of us protect it from so much more. The corridor began to shift and contract. The walls pulsed like a throat swallowing. I saw other figures in the darkness. Cops from other eras, their uniforms dating back decades. A woman in a 1950s NYPD uniform, her badge number still visible, 2847. A man whose uniform style hadn't been used since the 1970s. All of them transformed, all of them standing guard, all of them trapped and necessary. "Go!" Rachel shouted. "The building is waking up. It knows you're here. Go now and never come back." I ran. Behind me, I could hear the building groaning, hungry, angry that its secret had been discovered. The corridor stretched and contracted, trying to keep me, trying to make me one of them. Vincent grabbed me as I burst through the doorway, and together we slammed the metal door shut. The sounds from beyond stopped immediately, as if they'd never been. "What did you see?" Vincent demanded. "You were only gone for 30 seconds, but you look like—" 30 seconds? I checked my watch. He was right. But I'd been in that corridor for at least 10 minutes. I told Vincent everything on the drive back to my apartment. He didn't say he didn't believe me. In this job, you learn that the impossible is just another word for Tuesday. But he did say we needed to be smart about this. "If what you saw is real," he said, "then we can't fight it. Not with guns or badges or warrants. This is something beyond our pay grade. So we just let it keep taking cops? Every 26 years, we just sacrifice our own? Or," Vincent said slowly, "we make sure the wrong people are in the wrong place at the right time." I understood what he was suggesting. The new moon was in 3 days. The building would be hungry, looking for new guardians. What if we made sure it got fed, but not with good cops? We had 3 days to set it up. 3 days to identify the corrupt cops, the ones who'd crossed the line, the ones who made the rest of us look bad. Every precinct had them. Cops on the take. Cops who'd planted evidence. Cops who'd used their badge to hurt instead of help. Vincent and I worked through our contacts, identified 5 cops who wouldn't be missed, whose disappearance might actually make the city safer. There was Detective Ray Collins from the 109th, who'd been taking bribes from drug dealers for years. Officer Janet Brooks, who'd planted evidence on at least 3 innocent people we knew about. Sergeant Mike Torelli, who'd been running his own protection racket in Chinatown. Detective Paul Anderson, who'd beaten suspects in custody and always somehow had the cameras malfunction. Officer Diana Lee, who'd been selling confiscated drugs back onto the street. It wasn't legal, it wasn't moral, but it was necessary. The night of the new moon, we made anonymous calls, reported suspicious activity at the 114th precinct that required immediate investigation, made sure our 5 targets were the ones who responded, made sure they all ended up in the basement near that sealed door that Vincent had quietly cut open again. I watched from outside as the lights in the precinct flickered and died. I heard the screams, brief and quickly silenced, and then nothing. When the sun rose, 5 cops were missing. Their uniforms were found in the basement, neatly folded. The metal door was sealed again, but this time from the inside, welded shut with a heat that couldn't have come from any torch. The metal had rippled like water before freezing solid. The disappearances stopped. The 114th precinct continued to operate, its basement sealed off for renovations. Vincent and I never spoke about what we'd done. He retired 6 months later, moved to Florida. I transferred to Manhattan, tried to forget.
But sometimes, late at night, my phone rings. No number shows up on the screen. When I answer, it's Rachel's voice, distant and distorted. "Thank you," she says. "The ones you sent us, they're being punished in ways you can't imagine." They police the worst of the boundary crimes now, the ones that hurt the soul. Collins investigates the murders of hope itself. Brooks chases thieves who steal memories from children. Torelli stands guard at the threshold where nightmares try to become real. Anderson fights entities that feed on innocence. Lee pursues the dealers who traffic in human potential. It's justice, in its own way. "Are you okay?" I always ask. "I'm necessary," she always answers. "We all are. The city needs us, even if it doesn't know we exist, even if we don't exactly exist anymore." The line goes dead, and I'm left wondering if I saved the city or damned it. If I protected future cops or condemned them to something worse than death. If Rachel and the others are heroes or prisoners. The 114th precinct is still there, still operating. They've modernized it, installed new computers, painted over that institutional green. But the basement remains sealed. There's a new lock on the door now, electronic, state-of-the-art. But every 26 years, that lock fails. The door opens, and the building feeds. 2031 is coming. Another new moon. Another feeding. I've tried to warn the current administration, but they think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. Maybe none of this happened the way I remember. Maybe trauma and guilt have twisted my memories into something impossible. But I know what I saw in that corridor. I know what Rachel became. And I know that somewhere, in the spaces between what we understand and what we fear, there are cops still on duty, protecting us from crimes we can't even comprehend. I'm writing this down now because I'm sick. Terminal, the doctors say. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, spread to the liver and bones. I won't make it to 2031. Someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to be prepared. The building will feed again, and someone needs to make sure it feeds on the right people. If you're a cop reading this, and you get assigned to the 114th precinct in Queens, be careful. Pay attention to the basement. Notice which cops disappear during the new moon. And if you hear whispers in the walls, if you find a door that shouldn't exist, if reality seems just a little bit wrong, run. Or stay, if you're the kind of cop who hurts more than helps. Stay and face a justice that exists beyond courts and lawyers and plea deals. Stay and become what Rachel and the others became. Eternal guardians of the boundary, policing crimes that shouldn't exist, forever walking beats in dimensions that hurt to perceive. The choice, when the building makes it, won't be yours. But here's the thing I've learned in my years on the force. Every choice we make echoes. Every action has consequences beyond what we can see. I chose to send 5 corrupt cops into that impossible corridor. They chose to be corrupt in the first place. Rachel chose to enter that building to interview a witness. The building chose her. Choices upon choices, creating a pattern that repeats every 26 years. I used to think being a cop was about enforcing the law, protecting the innocent, maintaining order. But now I know it's bigger than that. Some of us protect the physical city. Others, like Rachel, protect something more fundamental, the boundaries of reality itself. I dream about that corridor sometimes. In my dreams, it's longer, stretching infinitely in all directions. The walls breathe and pulse with a life of their own, and walking those impossible halls are all the cops who vanished over the years, their forms twisted into something between human and other, their badges still gleaming despite the transformation. They're still serving and protecting, just in ways we never imagined when we took the oath. Vincent called me last week from a hospital in Miami. He's dying too, cancer eating him from the inside. He told me he dreams about them too. Dreams about Kevin and Marcus and Rachel standing guard at doorways that shouldn't exist, stopping things from coming through that would destroy everything we know. "Do you regret it?" he asked me. "What we did?" "I regret not doing it sooner," I told him. "I regret all the good cops who got taken before we figured it out." "Yeah," he said. "Me too." We didn't talk about the 5 we condemned. Some guilt is too heavy for words. The department has no record of what really happens at the 114th precinct. Officially, the missing officers are just that. Missing. Cold cases that will never be solved. The basement remains sealed, the evidence locker forgotten. New cops come and go, unaware of what lurks beneath their feet. But I know. Vincent knows. Captain Rossi knew before dementia took his memories. And now you know too. Every city has its secrets. Every police department has cases they don't talk about, things that don't fit in the official reports. New York is no different. We've got 8 million people living their lives, going to work, raising families, never knowing that reality is thinner than they think, never knowing that there are cops standing guard at the places where it's thinnest, making sure nothing gets through that shouldn't. The next time you see a missing person report for a cop, ask yourself, are they really missing? Or are they just serving in a different precinct now, one that exists in the spaces between what we know and what we fear? The next time you pass the 114th precinct in Queens, look at the basement windows. They're painted over now, have been since 1979. But sometimes, if the light hits them just right, you can see shadows moving behind the paint. Shadows that wear police uniforms. Shadows that used to be people we knew. Rachel Washington, Kevin O'Brien, Marcus and Gween, and hundreds of others over the years. Still on duty, still protecting and serving. Just not in any way we understand. I'll be dead before the next feeding. But someone else will figure it out, the way Vincent and I did. Someone else will make the same choice we made, to feed the building the corrupt instead of the innocent. Or maybe they'll make a different choice. Maybe they'll try to destroy the building, or seal it permanently, or find a way to free the trapped cops. But I don't think any of that will work. The building, the threshold, whatever it is, it's older than the city, older than the department. It was here before us and will be here after us. All we can do is try to minimize the damage, to make sure that when it feeds on those who deserve it. That's the real thin blue line. Not between cops and civilians, but between our reality and all the others. Between the world we know and the worlds we can't even imagine. And standing on that line, holding it, are the cops who vanished. The ones who were chosen. The ones who became something more than human in order to keep the rest of us safe. I'm not proud of what I did, but I do it again because that's what cops do. We make the hard choices so others don't have to. Even when those choices damn us. Even when they transform us into something unrecognizable. The 114th precinct still stands. The basement is still sealed. The countdown to 2031 has already begun. And somewhere, in a corridor that shouldn't exist, Rachel Washington is still on patrol. Different beat, different crimes, different reality. But still a cop. Still my partner. Still protecting and serving, even if we can't see her anymore. That's the thing about disappearing. Sometimes you're not gone. Sometimes you're just somewhere else, doing the job nobody else can do in a place nobody else can go. The building knows. The building remembers. And every 26 years, the building chooses. God help whoever it chooses next. But more than that, God help us all if it ever stops choosing. If there's no one left to guard those impossible corridors, to police those boundary crimes, to stand watch at the thresholds. Because then the things Rachel and the others are holding back will come through.
And badges and guns won't stop them. Nothing will. So the next time you hear about a cop who vanished without a trace, don't mourn them. They might just be working a different beat now, in a precinct that exists between the cracks of reality. Still serving. Still protecting. Just not here anymore. This is Detective Sophia Martinez, NYPD, signing off. If you're reading this after 2031 and the disappearances have started again, you know what to do. Feed the building, but feed it the right people. The city depends on it. We all do. You never forget the smell of a crime scene at 3 in the morning. Blood mixed with the city's filth, the sweat of fear in the air, and something else. Something wrong we couldn't quite put our finger on. I'm Officer Maria Gonzalez, and I've been working the night shift at Manhattan's 23rd Precinct for 5 years. But until I found the records office, I didn't understand what we were really protecting after midnight. It started 3 months ago, in November 2019. I was partnered with Tommy Walsh, an Irish kid fresh out of the academy, all nervous energy and textbook procedures. We were patrolling the Lower East Side, that maze of old tenements and new condos where gentrification hadn't quite finished its meal. The call came in at 2:17 a.m., domestic disturbance at 489 Delancey Street, apartment 4F. Nothing unusual about that. You work nights in New York, half your calls are domestic disputes. Neighbors tired of hearing screaming through thin walls, finally fed up enough to call it in. But when we got there, the building super, an old Dominican man named Carlos, was waiting for us on the stoop, chain-smoking and muttering prayers. "It's not normal fighting," he said, not meeting our eyes. "It's something else. Started 3 hours ago, same time as always." "Same time as always?" Tommy asked, pulling out his notepad like the eager rookie he was. "This is a recurring issue?" Carlos nodded, crushing his cigarette under his heel. "Every night for 2 weeks. Always starts at 11:17 p.m. Always ends at 3:33 a.m. Always the same apartment. But here's the thing. Officers, 4F has been empty for 6 months. The last tenant, Mrs. Chen, she died in her sleep. Natural causes, they said. No family to claim the place, so it just sits there." I exchanged a look with Tommy. Empty apartments don't have domestic disputes, but we could hear it now. Muffled shouting from the 4th floor, the sound of furniture being thrown around, glass breaking. "Maybe squatters," Tommy suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. We entered the building, the fluorescent lights in the stairwell flickering like they always do in these old places. The sounds got louder as we climbed. Not just shouting now, but crying too. A woman's voice, high and desperate, pleading in a language I didn't recognize. And a man's voice, lower, angrier, speaking the same unknown language. When we reached the 4th floor, the hallway was ice cold. Our breath came out in clouds, which made no sense. The building's heating was working fine on the other floors. The door to floor 4 was slightly open, darkness visible through the crack. "NYPD," I called out, hand on my weapon. "We're coming in." The voices stopped immediately. The silence was somehow worse than the shouting. Tommy pushed the door open with his foot, and we entered with flashlights drawn. The apartment was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. No furniture, no belongings, nothing but bare floors and walls. The windows were intact. There was no broken glass, no overturned furniture because there was no furniture to overturn. "What the hell?" Tommy whispered. That's when I noticed the marks on the floor. Scratch marks, like someone had been dragged, but they didn't lead anywhere. They just stopped in the middle of the room, forming a rough circle. and in the center of that circle there was a stain. Old, dark, soaked into the wood. Blood, maybe, but so old it was almost black. "We should call this in," Tommy said, but I was already pulling out my phone to take pictures. That's when I saw it, carved into the floorboards, so faint you'd miss it unless you were looking straight down. 11:17 p.m., 3:33 a.m., they always come back. We filed a report, but what could we say? Noise complaint, no source found. The lieutenant barely glanced at it before filing it away. But I couldn't let it go. Something about those carved words, that time frame, it stuck with me. I started paying attention to our calls during those hours. 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m., and that's when I noticed the pattern. Every night, without fail, we'd get certain calls during that window. Not just domestics, but specific types of crimes that seemed to repeat. A mugging at the corner of Bowery and Houston at 12:03 a.m., a break-in at the bodega on Avenue C at 1:45 a.m., a stabbing in the alley behind the Chinese restaurant on Mott Street at 2:58 a.m. The addresses were always the same. The times were always exact. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. When I looked up these incidents in our database, they'd been happening for years, decades even. Same crimes, same locations, same times, night after night. I tried to bring it up with other officers, but most just shrugged it off. City's got its patterns, they'd say. Criminals are creatures of habit. But Tommy, he believed me. He'd been there in that empty apartment. He'd heard those voices too. We started investigating on our own time, pulling old records, looking for connections. That's when Tommy found the first mention of the registry. It was in a report from 1987, filed by Officer Patricia Kowalski. She'd noticed the same pattern, the same repeated crimes. In her report, she mentioned finding a book in the precinct's old storage room. The Night Shift Registry, 1876 to present. She'd photocopied a few pages before the book mysteriously disappeared. The pages were disturbing. They described something called temporal crimes, violent acts that left such a deep psychic wound in the fabric of the city that they repeated endlessly, like a record skipping. The registry was supposedly a record of all these recurring crimes, maintained by a secret division of the NYPD that operated exclusively during the hours of 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m. According to Kowalski's notes, this division didn't prevent these crimes. That was impossible. Instead, they managed them, making sure the temporal echoes didn't spread, didn't infect other times and places with their violence. They were less police officers and more like containment specialists. Kowalski's career ended shortly after she filed that report. Officially, she resigned for personal reasons. Unofficially, nobody knew what happened to her. She just vanished one night during her shift. Tommy wanted to drop it after that, but I couldn't. I had to know more. So I started searching for the registry itself. I went through every storage room, every forgotten corner of the precinct. And finally, in a sub-basement I didn't even know existed, behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," that nobody seemed to have authorization for, I found it. The registry was massive, leather-bound, and impossibly old. The cover was worn smooth by countless hands, and when I opened it, the pages seemed to whisper against each other. The first entry was dated October 31st, 1876. The most recent was from last night. Each entry followed the same format. Time, location, nature of crime, participants, though these were listed not as names but as roles. The vengeful husband, the desperate thief, the innocent bystander, and a note about containment status. I flipped to November 15th, 2019. Today's date. There were 17 entries for the 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m. window. I recognized several from calls we'd responded to in the past weeks, but there was one that made my blood run cold. 2:47 a.m., 23rd Precinct Building, sub-basement, discovery crime. Participants, the curious officer, terminal, the rising darkness, primary. Containment status, pending breach. I looked at my watch. It was 2:44 a.m. The lights in the sub-basement went out. Not flickered, went out completely, like they'd never existed. The darkness that replaced them wasn't normal darkness. It was thick, tangible, like black water filling the room. I could feel it pressing against my skin, trying to get in through my mouth, my nose, my eyes. And in that darkness, something spoke. Not with a voice, but directly into my mind. You found the registry. That makes you part of it now. Every night, 11:17 to 3:33, you'll see them all. The murdered wives who kill their husbands forever. The children who die in the same fire over and over. The suicides who jump from the same bridges, the same windows, endlessly falling. You'll police the echo crimes, Officer Gonzalez. You'll make sure the dead stay in their patterns and that they don't spill over into the world of the living. No, I said, or tried to say, but the darkness was in my throat now, choking me. There is no no in the registry. You're written in now. Look. The lights came back on suddenly, and the registry was open to a new page. Today's date, but the entry was different. Recurring assignment, Officer Maria Gonzalez. 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m. Patrol sector, Lower East Side temporal crimes. Partner, Officer Patricia Kowalski. Deceased, active. Status, initiated, Patricia Kowalski. The officer who disappeared in 1987. I ran, up the stairs, through the precinct, out into the night. But when I looked at my watch, it was 2:47 a.m. Exactly 2:47 a.m. The second hand was moving, but the minute hand wasn't. I was stuck in that moment, the discovery crime moment the registry had predicted. I tried to call Tommy, but my phone just played a recorded message. The number you are trying to reach exists outside your current temporal zone. Please try again between 11:17 p.m. and 3:33 a.m. I drove home, but the streets were wrong. They were the same streets, but older. The bodega on the corner that had opened last year was gone, replaced by a butcher shop with newspapers in the window dated 1987. A woman stood under a streetlight, and when she turned to look at me, I recognized her from the photo in her personnel file, Patricia Kowalski, looking exactly as she had the night she disappeared 32 years ago. You found the registry, she said, her voice hollow. Just like I did. Now you're part of the night shift, the real night shift. This isn't real, I said. This can't be real. Real is relative after 11:17, Patricia replied. You'll see crimes that happened decades ago happening right now. You'll arrest the same criminals every night, process the same victims every morning. You'll file reports that no one in the day shift will ever see, because they exist in a different time. How do I get out? Patricia laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't. You serve your shift every night forever. That's the deal. Someone has to police the temporal crimes. Someone has to make sure the murdered stay murdered, that they don't come back wrong. That's us now. As she spoke, I started seeing them. Shadows moving in windows that should be dark. Figures walking through walls, replaying their last moments. A man in 1950s clothing, stabbing a woman in an alley that hadn't existed for 20 years. A child from the 1970s running from a fire that was simultaneously happening, and had happened, and would happen again. We don't stop them, Patricia explained. noticing my horror. We can't. They already happened. We just make sure they happen correctly, that they don't leak. You ever wonder why some crimes feel wrong? Why some murders seem especially cruel, especially senseless? That's when a temporal crime leaks into the present, when the echo becomes louder than the original scream. But Tommy, my partner, he knows about this. He can help. Your partner exists in linear time. You don't anymore. To him, you'll clock in at 11:17 p.m. and clock out at 3:33 a.m. and he won't remember anything strange. That's how it works. We exist in the gap, in the repeated hours where the city's wounds won't heal. I wanted to run again, but where would I go? Every street led back to the same moment. Every turn brought me face to face with another temporal crime. I saw a woman jump from a building that had been demolished in 2003, her scream echoing across decades. I saw a gang war from the 1980s playing out in the same intersection where hipsters now drank coffee during the day.
"The first few weeks are the hardest," Patricia said, almost kindly. "You'll try to interfere, try to save them. But you can't save someone who's already dead. You can't prevent a crime that's already happened. All you can do is observe, document, and contain. Contain how?" She pulled out what looked like a standard issue citation book, but the pages glowed with a faint blue light. "You write them up. Every temporal crime gets a citation. It keeps them locked in their loop. Without the citations, they start to spread. A murder in one apartment becomes murders in every apartment in the building. A suicide from one bridge becomes the epidemic of jumpers. The paperwork is what keeps the darkness at bay." She handed me my own citation book. It was heavier than it looked and warm to the touch. When I opened it, I saw that the first page already had an entry. "Officer Maria Gonzalez, badge number 7892, assigned to Temporal Crime Division, November 15th, 2019, in perpetuity. Shift hours, 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m. Jurisdiction, past, present, and potential crimes, Lower East Side Sector." "In perpetuity?" I asked. "Death doesn't end the assignment," Patricia said. "I've been dead for 32 years. You're still alive, technically, but that distinction matters less and less the longer you work the shift." As if to prove her point, she walked through a parked car, her form flickering like a bad signal. "Come on," she said. "Let me show you the route." We walked the streets of the Lower East Side, but it was every era of the Lower East Side at once. Tenements from the 1900s stood next to condos from 2019. Horse-drawn carriages shared the road with Uber drivers. And everywhere, the crimes played out on their endless loop. Patricia taught me to recognize the different types. The passion crimes burned hot and red, usually domestic murders that happened in moments of rage. The cold crimes were calculated, predetermined, and they moved through the city like ice, freezing everything they touched. The desperate crimes, muggings, robberies gone wrong, they had a yellow tinge to them, like old newspaper. "And then there are the special ones," she said, stopping in front of an unremarkable apartment building. "The ones that aren't content to just replay. The ones that are trying to change their endings." As she spoke, I heard it. The same shouting Tommy and I had investigated weeks ago. The same voices, the same unknown language. We climbed the stairs to apartment 4F, but this time the door was wide open and I could see inside. There were two figures, translucent and flickering. A man and a woman, dressed in clothes from the 1920s. They were fighting, but it wasn't just one fight. It was every fight they'd ever had, all happening simultaneously. I could see him hitting her stabbing him, both of them dying and being reborn to die again. "Mr. and Mrs. Volkov," Patricia said. Russian immigrants, 1923. He killed her, then himself. But they got stuck in the loop together. Every night they relive it, and every night they try to change it. He tries not to hit her, she tries not to grab the knife, but they always fail, because it already happened. That's horrible, I said. That's the job. We cite them, keep them contained to this apartment, otherwise their violence spreads. Every couple in the building starts fighting. The violence escalates. Linear time gets infected with temporal rage. She pulled out her citation book and wrote quickly. As she did, the figures in the apartment solidified slightly, their loop tightening. The man raised his hand. The woman reached for the knife. The eternal dance of their mutual destruction continued. We continued our patrol. I saw a child who had died in a sweatshop fire in 1911, still trying to escape through windows that no longer existed. I saw a cop from the 1960s, shot in the line of duty, still trying to call for backup on a radio that connected to nowhere. I saw suicides and murders and accidents, all repeating endlessly in the spaces between seconds. Why these hours? I asked. Why 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m.? The veil is thinnest then, Patricia explained. Something about the city's rhythm, its heartbeat. Most people are asleep. Their conscious minds aren't holding reality in place as firmly. That's when the past bleeds through. That's when the dead get restless. We were passing a park when I saw something that made me stop. It was a woman, young, maybe mid-20s, but she wasn't translucent like the others. She looked solid, real, alive. She was sitting on a bench, crying. That's not a temporal echo, I said. Patricia looked where I was pointing and frowned. No, it's not. She's linear. She shouldn't be able to see us. But when we approached, the woman looked right at us. Please, she said, please help me. I've been sitting here for hours, but the sun won't come up. My watch says it's been 2:15 a.m. for 3 hours. What's your name? I asked. Jennifer Ross. I was walking home from my shift at the hospital when time just stopped. Everyone disappeared. The city's empty except for the ghosts. Patricia and I exchanged a look. This wasn't supposed to happen. Linear people weren't supposed to get stuck in the temporal zone. When did your shift end? Patricia asked. 11:17, Jennifer said. I left right at 11:17, the exact moment the temporal zone began. She's caught on the boundary, Patricia muttered. This is bad. If a living person gets fully integrated into the temporal zone, she didn't need to finish. I could figure it out. If Jennifer fully entered our reality, she'd become like us, a guardian of the echo crimes, stuck forever in the repeating hours. How do we get her out? I asked. We need to get her to 3:33 a.m., Patricia said. If she can cross that boundary, she'll snap back to linear time, but the temporal crimes will try to stop her. They don't like the living walking through their domain. As if on cue, the shadows around us began to move. The temporal echoes, the ghostly criminals and victims, were converging on our location. They moved wrong, stuttering through space like a video glitching. Their faces were twisted with an hunger I'd never seen in the living or the dead. Run, Patricia said. We ran, pulling Jennifer with us. Behind us, the city's accumulated violence gave chase. I saw the Volkovs, no longer contained to their apartment, their eternal fight now a pursuit. The burned child from the sweatshop had become something else, something made of smoke and screams. Every murder victim, every suicide, every temporal echo in the Lower East Side was following us. Why do they want her? I shouted as we ran. She's alive, Patricia replied. If they can take her, possess her, they can change their endings. They can use her life to rewrite their deaths. We turned a corner and found ourselves in Times Square,
but it was every version of Times Square at once. The modern electronic billboards overlapped with signs from the 1970s, which overlapped with newspapers from the 1920s. The temporal echoes were coming from every era now, not just the Lower East Side, but all of Manhattan's violent dead. I looked at my watch. 3:31 a.m., 2 minutes. "We're not going to make it," Jennifer sobbed. That's when I had an idea. I pulled out my citation book, the one that kept the temporal crimes contained. But instead of writing a citation, I tore out a page. The effect was immediate. Reality hiccuped. The temporal echo nearest to us, a man who'd been pushed in front of a subway in 1985, suddenly solidified, became real. He looked at his hands in wonder, then ran into the night, free from his loop. "What are you doing?" Patricia screamed. "You can't release them." "I'm not releasing them," I said, tearing out another page. "I'm trading them." Each page I tore out freed a temporal echo, gave them a second of true existence. And in that second, they forgot about Jennifer, forgot about their hunger for life. They were too busy experiencing their freedom. 3:32 a.m. We were almost at the precinct. If we could get Jennifer inside, get her to a safe space when 3:33 hit, she might snap back to linear time. But the Volkovs were faster than the others. They'd been fighting for almost a century. They had more rage, more practice with violence. The husband reached for Jennifer with hands that had killed before, would kill again, were always killing. I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped between them and opened the registry itself, showing them their own entry. October 13th, 1923. Domestic violence / murder-suicide. Participants: Mikhail Volkov, perpetrator; Elena Volkov, victim perpetrator. Status: contained. "That's all you are," I told them. "A entry in a book, a crime that already happened. You can't change the ending because the ending was written before you even started." They paused, staring at their entry. Elena Volkov's ghostly face crumpled with despair. "We just wanted to do it differently," she whispered. "Just once, to do it differently." "I know," I said, and I did. That was the cruelest part of the temporal crimes. The criminals and victims were both trapped, both suffering, both trying to change something that couldn't be changed. 3:33 a.m. The world snapped like a rubber band. Jennifer vanished, hopefully returned to linear time. The temporal echoes dissolved back into their loops, their patterns, their endless repetitions. Patricia and I stood alone in the suddenly normal-looking Times Square as the sun began to rise. "You broke protocol," Patricia said. "You released temporal echoes." You showed them the registry. "I saved someone. This time. But what about next time? What about when someone else gets stuck? You can't tear out pages every night. Eventually, there won't be any containment left." She was right, but I was beginning to understand something about the night shift, about our real job. We weren't just containing the temporal crimes, we were witnessing them. We were the only ones who saw their pain, their endless loops, their desperate attempts to change. "Maybe that's the point," I said. "Maybe we're not just here to contain them. Maybe we're here to remember them, to acknowledge that they're more than just echoes." Patricia looked at me for a long moment. "You won't last," she said finally. "Officers who think like that, who empathize too much, they don't last. They either quit, go insane, or worse, they join the echoes, become temporal crimes themselves." "What happened to you?" I asked. "Really happened, not what the file says." Patricia smiled sadly. "I tried to save one, a little girl who burned in a tenement fire in 1955. Every night, I watched her die. Every night she reached for me, begged me to save her. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached back. She held up her hand, and I could see through it more clearly now, could see that she was fading. The moment I touched her,
I started to become like her. Not dead, not alive, but something in between. I've been fading ever since. Another few years, maybe less, and I'll be just another echo, another entry in the registry. Is there any way out? Any way to end this? The registry has existed since New York was New Amsterdam. There have always been officers of the night shift, in one form or another. The indigenous people had their own version before Europeans arrived. It's not a job you quit. It's a responsibility you bear until you can't anymore. We walked back to the precinct as the city woke up around us. Normal people heading to normal jobs, unaware of the violence that replayed itself every night in the spaces they walked through. When we reached the precinct, Tommy was there, starting his day shift. He looked right through me as if I wasn't there. "Tommy?" I called out, but he didn't respond. "You're out of phase with linear time during daylight hours," Patricia explained. "You exist, but you exist adjacent to reality. You can observe but not interact." I watched Tommy go about his morning, checking his messages, grabbing coffee. He had no memory of investigating the empty apartment with me, no memory of the registry. To him, I was just another night shift officer he'd never really gotten to know. This was my life now. Every night from 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m., I'd patrol the temporal crimes. I'd cite the echoes, contain the violence, and try to prevent the past from infecting the present. During the day, I'd exist as a ghost myself, unable to interact with the world I was protecting. Months passed. I learned the patterns, the routes, the regular temporal crimes that needed constant management. The Volkovs in apartment 4F, the gangland execution at the corner of Houston and Ludlow that happened every night at 1:15 a.m., bullets passing through the same bodies forever. The woman who threw herself from the Manhattan Bridge at 2:47 a.m., falling endlessly through time. I met other night shift officers, some from different precincts, some from different eras. There was Detective James Murphy, who'd been working the shift since 1943. Officer Sarah Kim, who joined in 2001 after accidentally witnessing a temporal crime during 9/11. Because yes, even that tragedy had its echoes, its repetitions, its souls caught in endless loops of falling. We'd meet sometimes at a diner that existed only between 2 and 3 a.m., a place where night shift officers could eat and pretend to be normal for an hour. The food was always the same. Coffee that tasted like 1952, pie that tasted like 1987, burgers that tasted like tomorrow. The worst part, Detective Murphy once told me, isn't the violence. It's the hope. Every night they hope it will be different. Every night they try to change. The murderers try not to murder. The victims try to escape. But the script is already written. We're all just playing our parts. He was fading too, like Patricia. They all were, all the officers who'd been on the night shift too long. Eventually, we'd all become echoes ourselves, temporal crimes of a different sort. But there were moments of not quite beauty, but something close. Sometimes a temporal echo would achieve a moment of peace. The Volkovs would pause in their fighting and dance, just for a second, remembering the love that had once existed before the violence. The falling woman would sometimes smile as she fell, experiencing a moment of flight before the impact that never quite came. And sometimes, we could make a difference. Not in changing the crimes, but in how they were experienced. I learned that if I stood in certain places at certain times, my presence would calm the echoes. They seemed to recognize us, the night shift officers, as witnesses to their pain, and being witnessed, being remembered as more than just violence, seemed to give them a kind of peace. One night, about 6 months into my assignment, something changed. I was doing my regular patrol when I noticed a new temporal crime, one that wasn't in the registry. A young man, maybe 17,
being shot in an alley that hadn't existed in any era I knew. He wore clothes that looked wrong, fabric that seemed to shift between different time periods. I approached cautiously. The boy was dying, had been dying, would always be dying, but he looked at me with eyes that were fully aware, not the glazed look of most temporal echoes. "You're Officer Gonzalez," he said. "You're the one who saved Jennifer Ross." I froze. How did he know about that? "I'm from 2047, he continued, his voice weak but clear. "In my time, the temporal crimes have spread beyond the night shift hours. They're happening all day, every day. The barrier is breaking down. The registry is failing." "That's impossible. The night shift." "The night shift ends in 2031, he interrupted. "When the last officer fades completely and there's no one left to replace them. No one knows about the registry anymore. No one volunteers for the duty. The temporal crimes go uncontained. The past eats the present, eats the future." "So you came back to warn us?" "I came back to become a temporal crime myself," he said. "If I die here, in this temporal zone, I become part of the registry. I become evidence that the future needs protecting too. Maybe that will be enough to recruit new officers to keep the shift going." "You sacrificed yourself to become a ghost?" "We're all ghosts, Officer Gonzalez. Some of us just haven't happened yet." He died then, for the first time and the last time, and every time. I wrote him up in my citation book, gave him an official entry in the registry. But I also did something else. I wrote a report, a real report, not for the temporal division, but for the regular NYPD. I documented everything, the registry, the night shift, the temporal crimes. I made copies, hid them throughout the precinct, throughout the city. Maybe someone would find them. Maybe someone would believe. Patricia found me after that, and she was angry. "You're trying to expose us? Do you know what happens if the linear world learns about the temporal crimes?" "They need to know. We need more officers. We're fading, all of us, and if what that boy said is true..." "Temporal echoes lie," she said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "They tell you what you want to hear, or what you fear to hear." He knew about Jennifer. He knew about the future. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About us being witnesses, not just containers. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's why we fade, because we're trying to hold them apart from the world instead of helping the world remember them." Over the next few weeks, we tried something different. Instead of just citing the temporal crimes, we started documenting them properly. Not just the facts, time, place, nature of crime, but the stories, who these people were before they became echoes, what led them to their violent ends, what they'd hoped for, who they'd loved, what they'd lost. We created a second registry, one that recorded not just the crimes but the humanity of those trapped in them. Elena Volkov had been a seamstress who'd wanted to open her own shop. Mikhail had written poetry that no one had ever read. The falling woman was named Margaret Chen, and she'd been a nurse who'd lost too many patients during the influenza epidemic. Something strange happened as we filled this new registry. The temporal echoes began to change, not their crimes, those still repeated endlessly, but their awareness. They started to see us more clearly, to recognize us not as captors but as chroniclers. Some even began to speak to us, to tell us their stories in the moments between violence, and we stopped fading as quickly. "It's because we're not fighting them anymore," Patricia realized. "We're not using our energy to contain them. We're using it to remember them, but remembering came with its own price. The more we knew about the echoes, the harder it became to watch them suffer. Every night I watched Margaret Chen fall from the bridge,
and now I knew she was thinking about her daughter as she fell. Every night I watched the Volkovs fight, and now I knew they were recreating the only passionate connection they'd ever had, even if it was violent. One night, a year into my service, everything changed again. I was writing in the new registry when I heard footsteps in the sub-basement. Not the stuttering steps of a temporal echo, but solid, real footsteps. It was Tommy Walsh, my old partner from linear time. "Maria?" he said, and I nearly dropped the registry. He could see me. He was here, in the temporal zone, during the night shift hours, and he could see me. "How?" was all I could manage.
"I've been researching," he said, holding up a stack of papers. "Ever since you disappeared, everyone said you quit, but I knew better. I found your reports, the ones you hid. I learned about the registry, the night shift, and I figured out how to cross over. Tommy, you can't be here if you get stuck." "I'm not staying," he said quickly. "But Maria, I found something. In the city archives, in the really old stuff. The registry isn't just a record, it's a contract, and contracts can be renegotiated." He showed me a document from 1676 written in Dutch. Even without being able to read it, I could feel the power radiating from the old paper. The original agreement, Tommy explained, between the city and something else. Something that feeds on repetition, on patterns, on violence that echoes through time. The night shift officers aren't just protecting the city from temporal crimes. They're feeding this thing, keeping it contained by giving it a steady diet of repeated violence. "So we're not protectors," I said, feeling sick. "We're farmers. We're cultivating the temporal crimes for something else to feed on." "But here's the thing," Tommy continued. "The contract has a termination clause. If the city ever becomes truly peaceful for one full cycle of night shift hours, 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m., the contract ends. The temporal crimes stop repeating. The echoes are freed." "The city's never peaceful," Patricia said, appearing behind us. I hadn't heard her approach. "There's always violence somewhere." "Not on December 31st, 1899, Tommy said. "I checked the records. For those exact hours, as the century turned, there wasn't a single reported crime in New York City. Everyone was celebrating or sleeping or praying. For just those hours, the city was at peace. That was over a century ago," I pointed out. "But we're not bound by linear time," Tommy said, looking at me intently. "You could go there. You could patrol those hours, make sure they stay peaceful and break the contract." "That's not how it works," Patricia protested. "We can't change the past. We can only observe and contain." "But what if the past is already changed?" Tommy asked. "What if the reason there was peace that night was because a night shift officer was there making sure of it?" It was a paradox, a loop, the kind of thing that made your head hurt if you thought about it too long. But it was also hope, the first real hope I'd felt since finding the registry. "How would I even get there?" I asked. Tommy pulled out an old badge, tarnished and worn. This belonged to Officer Michael O'Sullivan, night shift, 1899. I found it in an evidence box that shouldn't exist. If Patricia's theory about objects carrying temporal resonance is correct. Patricia took the badge, examined it closely. It might work. Objects connected to specific temporal crimes can sometimes serve as anchors. "But Maria, if you go back and the plan doesn't work, you might be stuck in 1899's night shift forever. As opposed to being stuck in 2019's night shift forever?" She had no answer to that. We spent the next week preparing. Patricia taught me how to navigate temporal currents, how to use the badge as an anchor. Tommy researched everything he could about New York on December 31st, 1899. The other night, shift officers thought we were crazy, but a few offered their help. Detective Murphy gave me his citation book from the 1940s, saying it might work better in the past. Officer Kim taught me phrases in languages that were common in 1899's New York. On the night of the attempt, Tommy insisted on being there. If this works, he said, someone needs to witness it from linear time. Someone needs to remember that it happened. At exactly 11:17 p.m., I held Officer O'Sullivan's badge and let myself fall backward through time. The sensation was like drowning in reverse, being born and dying simultaneously. I saw the city's history in reverse. September 11th healing itself. The Twin Towers rising from nothing, wars ending and beginning, buildings crumbling into existence. And then I was there. December 31st, 1899, 11:17 p.m. The city was different but familiar. Gas lamps instead of electric lights, horses instead of cars, but the same energy, the same sense of possibility. And everywhere, people celebrating the turn of the century. I could feel the temporal crimes trying to manifest. A murder that wanted to happen on Mulberry Street. A suicide attempting to occur at the Battery. But they were weak here, uncertain. This night was special, protected by the joy and hope of thousands of souls looking forward to a new century. I patrolled as I'd been trained, but instead of citing crimes, I prevented them. I directed a drunk man away from the confrontation that would have ended in violence. I stood between a desperate woman and the river until she decided to see the new century after all. I was everywhere and nowhere, a guardian of peace rather than a chronicler of violence, and it was working. The hours passed without a single temporal crime taking root. The city remained at peace. At 3:32 a.m. I felt it, the contract straining, reality bending. Whatever entity had made the original deal was stirring, angry at being cheated of its meal. Then I saw him, Officer O'Sullivan, the original owner of the badge. He was a temporal echo, but different. He wasn't trapped in violence, he was trapped in duty, eternally walking his beat on this night that never ended for him. "So you're the one," he said in a thick Irish accent. "The one from tomorrow who comes to yesterday to fix today." Something like that. "I volunteered for this," he said. "To guard this night forever, to make sure it stays peaceful. Been walking this same beat for over a century, keeping the contract from being fulfilled. But I'm here to break the contract." He smiled sadly. "No, lass. You're here to fulfill it. The contract doesn't end when the city is peaceful. It ends when a night shift officer chooses peace over duty, when they stop feeding the beast and start feeding hope instead." "I don't understand. The entity feeds on repetition, on patterns. But what pattern is stronger than hope? What echoes more powerfully than the moment when a century turns and everyone believes tomorrow will be better? That's what you're really doing here, creating a temporal crime of hope, something so powerful it overwrites all the violence." 3:33 a.m. approached. Around us, the city celebrated, unaware of the cosmic negotiation happening in their midst. "Make the choice," O'Sullivan said. "Choose to break the pattern. Choose to believe that the violence doesn't have to repeat, that the echoes can fade, that the night shift can end." I thought about all the temporal crimes I'd witnessed. The Volkovs, trapped in their violent love. Margaret Chen, falling forever. The boy from 2047, warning of a future where the past consumed everything. And I made the choice. I took out my citation book, and instead of writing a citation, I wrote a pardon for all of them. Every temporal crime, every echo, every soul trapped in repetition. I forgave them, released them, told them their stories were over and they could rest. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Reality cracked like ice. The entity roared in rage and hunger, but also something else. As the temporal crimes dissolved, as the echoes faded, they didn't disappear. They transformed, becoming something new. The violence became memory. The repetition became history. The echoes became stories that could finally end. I felt myself being pulled back to 2019, through all the years, all the crimes, all the suffering. But it was different now. The temporal crimes weren't repeating. They were completing, finding their conclusions, their peace. I landed in the sub-basement of the 23rd Precinct at exactly 3:33 a.m., December 31st, 2019. Tommy was there, Patricia too, and they were staring at me in wonder. "Did it work?" Tommy asked. I looked at Patricia. She was solid, real, no longer fading. "You're alive," I said. "We all are," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "All the night shift officers. We're not echoes anymore. We're people again." The registry was still there, but when I opened it, the pages were different. Instead of ongoing crimes, they showed completed cases. Every temporal crime had a resolution, an ending, a final entry that said simply, "Case closed." Over the next few days, we discovered the extent of the change. The night shift still existed, but it was different. Instead of containing temporal crimes, we were now more like temporal social workers. The echoes were still there, but they weren't trapped. They were just visiting, saying goodbye, finishing their stories. The Volkovs came to me on the first night of the new system. They weren't fighting. They were dancing, as they had on their wedding day before everything went wrong. "Thank you," Elena said, "for seeing us as more than our worst moment." "What will you do now?" I asked. "Move on," Mikhail replied. "Finally move on." And they did, fading not into repetition but into whatever comes after. Margaret Chen stopped falling and started flying. Her last moments transformed from despair to release. The boy from 2047 returned to his own time, which now existed because the future was no longer being eaten by the past. Tommy joined the night shift officially, working with us to help the remaining echoes find peace. We became counselors, therapists, witnesses to the city's healing. The hours of 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m. became a time of reconciliation rather than repetition. Patricia, fully alive again, took over the day shift coordination, helping regular cops understand that sometimes the voices they heard in old buildings weren't threats but farewells. The city began to acknowledge its ghosts, to honor them rather than fear them. The registry transformed too. It became a memorial, a record not of ongoing crimes, but of lives lived and lost. We still added entries, but now they were stories of resolution, of justice finally served, of peace finally found. One night, about a month after the change, Officer O'Sullivan appeared to me. Not as an echo, but as something else, something more complete. "Thank you," he said, "for completing what I started, for having the courage to choose hope over duty." "What happens to you now?" I asked. "I get to stop walking the beat," he said with a smile. "After 120 years, I finally get to go home." He tipped his cap and walked into the dawn, disappearing not into repetition but into rest. The night shift continues, but it's different now. We still patrol from 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m., but we're not guarding against the past. We're helping it heal. Every night a few more echoes find peace. Every night the city becomes a little less haunted. There are still crimes, of course. New York is still New York. But they don't repeat endlessly anymore. They happen, we investigate them, we solve them, or we don't, and then they become history instead of hauntings. I still carry my citation book, but now I fill it with different things. Stories of reconciliation, moments of peace, the names of echoes who've moved on. It's becoming less like a ledger of crimes and more like a book of memories, a record of healing. Sometimes I wonder what that entity was, the one that fed on repetition and violence. Tommy thinks it was some kind of parasitic consciousness, feeding on human suffering. Patricia believes it was the city's shadow self, its accumulated trauma given form. Detective Murphy, who's enjoying his second chance at life, thinks it was just a mistake, a cosmic clerical error that got out of hand. Me? I think it was loneliness. Something ancient and hungry that didn't know any other way to connect except through repetition, through patterns, through the endless echo of violence. And maybe, by breaking the pattern, we taught it a different way to exist. Maybe it's still out there, learning to feed on joy instead of pain, on hope instead of despair. The city feels different now. Lighter, despite all its problems. Like a weight has been lifted, a debt has been paid. The past is still there, but it's not pressing down on the present anymore. It's just the past. I still work the night shift. We all do, those of us who went through the change. It's not a curse anymore, but a calling. We're the guardians of the city's memories, the shepherds of its ghosts, the witnesses to its healing. And every night from 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m., we walk the streets of every New York that ever was, helping the echoes find their endings, helping the stories find their close. Because that's what the real night shift is about. Not containing the darkness, but guiding it toward the light. Not trapping the past, but helping it pass. The registry sits in the sub-basement still, available for anyone who needs to read it. But it's not a book of ongoing crimes anymore. It's a book of closed cases, of stories that finally got their endings. And at the very last entry, written in my hand, it simply says, "The night shift continues, no longer as guardians of repetition, but as guides to resolution. We serve from 11:17 p.m. to 3:33 a.m., not to contain the past, but to help it find peace. This is our duty, our privilege, our purpose. To remember, to witness, to heal. The city's wounds no longer repeat, they scar, they fade, they become part of the story instead of the whole story. This is the new contract, written not in blood but in hope. May it hold for as long as the city needs us." And below that, a note from Officer O'Sullivan, somehow written across time, "Every ending is a beginning. Every ghost was once a person. Every echo was once a voice. Remember them not for how they died, but for how they lived. This is the true duty of the night shift." I close the registry and return to my patrol. It's 2:47 a.m., the time when Margaret Chen used to fall. But tonight, like every night since the change, she's not falling. She's sitting on the bridge, watching the city lights, finally at peace. "Beautiful night," she says as I pass. "Every night is," I reply. And in this New York, in this moment between night and dawn, between past and future, it's true. The night shift continues. We continue. Not as prisoners of time, but as its healers. And somewhere in the distance, church bells ring out 3:33 a.m., marking the end of another shift, the beginning of another day, the continuation of a story that finally knows how to end.